The scent of pine and sage clung to the mountain air, masking the underlying fear that permeated the modest cabin Eleanor Silverheart called home. Outside her window, dawn painted the sky in hues of amber and violet, but the beauty was lost on her. Eleanor stood motionless before the cracked mirror, her reflection fragmenting like the pieces of her life. 21 years of existence, and what did she have to show for it? Calloused hands from working at the Ravenwood Conservation Forest, a small room in the shadow of her aunt's ambitions, and a wooden wolf amulet that hung from her neck, the last gift from her father before he vanished into the northern wilderness 4 winters ago. The amulet seemed to pulse with warmth against her skin as her fingers traced its intricate carvings. A wolf with its head thrown back in silent howl, crafted by William Silverheart's own hands. "Find your strength in stillness," he used to whisper. "When they mistake your quiet for weakness, you'll have already won." But what strength could she find now? Her pale blonde hair, the only feature she'd inherited from her mother, caught the early morning light. Like spun moonlight, her father once called it. "A beacon to call trouble," Diana would snarl. "Eleanor, get down here, girl!" Diana Blackwood's voice shattered her thoughts, sharp as breaking glass. "They'll be here by noon, and you look like you've been sleeping in the forest again." Eleanor slipped into her simple blue dress, the nicest she owned, though it hung loose on her frame after months of smaller portions at the dinner table. As she descended the creaking stairs, she caught her reflection in the tarnished hallway mirror. Pale skin, wide gray eyes framed by those strange blonde locks that seemed to shimmer even in dim light. Nothing remarkable, nothing anyone would want, except apparently to settle a debt. Diana stood in the center of the kitchen, her dark hair pulled severely from her face, highlighting cheekbones that might have been beautiful if not for the coldness in her eyes. She was arranging freshly cut wildflowers in a chipped vase, a pathetic attempt to brighten the dreary cabin. "There you are." Diana's lips curled into what might have passed for a smile, if not for the calculating gleam in her eyes. "Stand straight. Remember what I told you." "To be grateful," Eleanor recited mechanically, "that anyone would take someone like me at all." Diana's fingers dug into Eleanor's shoulders, pinching hard enough to bruise. "That's right. The fact that the king agreed to erase my debt in exchange for a bride is nothing short of miraculous. Don't ruin this with your peculiarities." Eleanor's peculiarities were simply her tendency to observe rather than speak, to read people like the books she'd hidden beneath the floorboards of her room. Father had called it a gift. Diana called it unnerving. "What debt?" Eleanor dared to ask, though she already suspected the answer. Diana's face flushed with anger, then embarrassment. Lord Harwick was kind enough to extend credit during a difficult time. The terms were challenging. "You gambled away the last of Father's money," Eleanor stated flatly. It wasn't a question. The slap came quickly, stinging across her cheek. "Watch your tongue, girl. If not for me, you'd be in an orphanage, or worse." Eleanor absorbed the pain silently, her face betraying nothing. She'd learned long ago that reactions only fed Diana's cruelty. "Lord Harwick demanded repayment," Diana continued, rubbing her hand as if it had been injured by the contact. "When I couldn't produce the funds, he offered an alternative arrangement." "Me," Eleanor whispered. "Yes, you. Though why he'd want a strange girl who spends more time with wolves than people is beyond my understanding." Diana turned away, straightening the threadbare curtains. "But it seems King Alexander Blackthorne has intervened. He's paid your bride price to Harwick and now comes to claim what's his." The distant sound of hooves broke through their tense exchange. Eleanor's heart thundered against her ribs as she peered through the window. A procession of riders appeared on the horizon, their standards bearing the silver wolf of the Blackthorne kingdom. Leading them was a figure on a massive black stallion, his silhouette powerful and commanding. "The crippled king," Diana whispered, a note of fear in her voice. "They say he's more beast than man since the Eastern War, that his rage can level mountains and his roar can stop a man's heart." Eleanor watched as the riders drew closer, her fingers instinctively finding the wooden amulet at her throat. It pulsed with unusual warmth, a warning or something else entirely. "Go wait in the garden," Diana hissed, smoothing her own elaborate dress. "Let me speak with them first, and for God's sake try to look somewhat appealing." The garden was a small patch of earth where Eleanor had cultivated herbs and wildflowers, her only sanctuary in this house of shadows. She knelt beside the rosebush, its thorns brushing against her skin like a reminder of the pain that had been her constant companion. Through the open window she could hear Diana's voice, honeyed and dripping with false deference. "Your Majesty, what an honor to welcome you to our humble home." A deep voice responded, too low for Eleanor to make out the words. But something in its timbre sent a shiver down her spine, not entirely of fear. There was power in that voice, yes, but also something unexpected. Pain, perhaps, or loneliness. Minutes stretched like hours before Diana appeared at the garden gate, her smile tight. "They're ready for you. Don't speak unless spoken to, and remember, this arrangement benefits everyone. Your sacrifice saves this household." The word sacrifice hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor followed Diana into their small sitting room, eyes fixed on the worn floorboards, counting each step as though they were her last moments of freedom. 17 steps, and then she sensed, rather than saw, the presence that filled the room. "Look up, girl," came that same deep voice. Slowly, Eleanor raised her gaze, bracing herself for whatever grotesque figure had haunted village rumors. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. King Alexander Blackthorne sat in her father's old chair, his frame too large for the modest furniture. He wasn't grotesque, far from it. His face was all sharp angles and stern beauty, framed by dark hair that brushed broad shoulders. His eyes were the color of thunderstorms, gray with flecks of amber that seemed to burn when they met hers. His jawline was shadowed with a neatly trimmed beard that couldn't hide a scar running from his left temple to his chin, a silver line that only emphasized his ferocity rather than diminishing it. It was only when he shifted that she noticed his right leg held stiffly before him, and beside his chair leaned an intricately carved silver staff topped with a wolf's head. The source of his title, the crippled king. "This is the bride?" he asked, though not to Eleanor. His gaze remained fixed on her face, searching, assessing. She felt stripped bare by that gaze, as though he could see every hidden thought, every fear. Her hands trembled, and she clasped them tightly together, the wooden amulet pressing into her palm. "Evelyn Silverheart, Your Majesty," Diana answered with a nervous laugh. "As arranged." "She doesn't speak?" the king asked, a note of curiosity in his voice. "Oh, she speaks," Diana interjected. "When appropriate. She's properly trained in etiquette, I assure you." Something dark flickered across the king's face. "I didn't ask for a trained pet, Lady Blackwood. I asked for a bride." He stood then, revealing his full height, towering over everyone in the room. When he moved toward Eleanor, it was with a pronounced limp, yet there was nothing weak about his approach. Each step was deliberate, powerful, the rhythm of a predator who knew his own strength. "Do you consent to this arrangement?" he asked Eleanor directly, his voice low enough that perhaps only she could hear. The question startled her. No one had asked for her consent. Not Diana, not the village elders who had facilitated this deal. She stared up at him, searching those storm cloud eyes for the trick, the trap. Her voice emerged as a whisper. "I was not aware I had a choice, Your Majesty." A muscle tightened in his jaw. Everyone has choices, though rarely easy ones. He glanced at Diana, whose false smile had frozen in place. "If you refuse, I will still honor the debt forgiveness. Your stepmother's poor decisions need not determine your fate." The room fell silent. Diana's face drained of color, her eyes widening with disbelief and rage, and Eleanor felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of it. "And if I agree?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "Then you become my queen," Alexander replied simply. "You will have protection, respect, and all the privileges of your station. I ask only loyalty in return. Not love, not even affection, just loyalty." The practical arrangement appealed to Eleanor in its honesty. No false promises, no pretty lies, just a clear exchange. "I consent," she said, surprising even herself with the steadiness of her voice. Something like approval flickered in the king's eyes. He turned to the older man beside him, a weathered warrior with silver at his temples. "Malcolm, the contract!" The man named Malcolm produced a scroll bearing an ornate seal. Alexander took it and held it out to Diana. "As agreed, the debt to Lord Harwick is settled in full. Eleanor Silverheart is now under my protection as future Queen of Blackthorne." Diana's hands shook as she reached for the document. "So generous, Your Majesty," she murmured, though the hatred in her eyes betrayed her true feelings. "Pack your things," Alexander said to Eleanor. "Only what truly belongs to you. We ride within the hour." "Yes, Your Majesty," she answered, giving a small curtsy. "Alexander," he corrected, "if you're to be my queen, you should use my name." Eleanor nodded, unable to form words around the knot in her throat. She hurried upstairs to her small room, mind reeling with the sudden turn of events. Pack only what truly belongs to you. It would be a small bundle indeed. She gathered her father's worn journal, a pressed flower from her mother's grave, a simple change of clothes, and the small knife she used for harvesting herbs. Everything she owned fit into a canvas sack that looked pathetically small when she descended the stairs. The king waited by the door, massive against the humble doorframe of the cabin. When he saw her meager possessions, something like anger flashed in his eyes, though not directed at her. "Is this all?" he asked quietly. "All that matters," she replied. He nodded once, then offered his arm. "Then let us depart." Outside, the king's entourage waited. Eleanor recognized the older warrior Malcolm, now astride a chestnut mare. Beside him sat another man, younger, with sharp eyes that missed nothing as they swept over Eleanor. "My advisors," Alexander explained. "Malcolm has served the Blackthorn line for 40 years. Beside him is Terence, our master of intelligence." A stable boy brought forward a white mare with a beautifully tooled saddle. Eleanor hesitated, then confessed, "I've never ridden anything grander than the neighbor's plow horse, Your Maj." Alexander. The king's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "The mare is gentle, but if you prefer, you may ride with me until you grow accustomed." Diana watched from the doorway, her expression a mixture of bitterness and calculation. Eleanor could almost see her stepmother's mind working, plotting some future advantage from this connection. The thought made her stomach turn. "I'll learn the mare," Eleanor decided, unwilling to show weakness before Diana's hungry gaze. Alexander seemed to understand her motivation. With a nod to the stable boy, he supervised as Eleanor was helped onto the horse. The saddle felt foreign beneath her, the height dizzying, but the mare stood patiently, as if sensing her rider's nervousness. As the procession prepared to depart, Eleanor risked one last glance at the cabin that had been her prison for so long. Diana stood frozen in the doorway, her face a mask of frustrated ambition. No goodbye was offered from either woman. They rode north along the old forest road, deeper into the wilds of Ravenwood. Eleanor struggled to maintain her seat, focusing on the rhythm of the mare's movements. Around her, the king's guards maintained a watchful perimeter, hands never far from their weapons. Alexander rode at the head of the column, his silver staff secured at his saddle. Even injured, he sat his massive black stallion with natural authority, his back straight, his gaze constantly scanning the road ahead. Though he didn't look back, Eleanor felt he was acutely aware of her presence behind him. "The king found you himself, you know," Malcolm said, bringing his horse alongside Eleanor's. His weathered face was kind, despite the scars that marked his jaw. "Could have sent any of us to fetch you, but he insisted on coming personally." Eleanor frowned. "Why would he do that? I'm no one special." Malcolm's eyes crinkled. "The king doesn't share his reasons often, even with old friends like me. But I will tell you this. Alexander Blackthorn doesn't waste his time on things or people he deems unimportant." Before Eleanor could question him further, a sound cut through the forest silence, a low, menacing growl. The guards immediately formed a tighter circle around Eleanor and the king, weapons drawn. "Wolves," Terence said, drawing his bow, "moving alongside us in the trees." Eleanor felt a familiar tingle at the back of her neck, the same sensation she experienced when working with the wolves at the conservation forest. Without thinking, she reached for her amulet, finding comfort in its familiar contours. To her surprise, the wooden carving felt hot against her palm, almost burning. A prickling awareness spread up her arm, and suddenly she could sense them. 6 wolves, moving parallel to the road, curious rather than threatening. "They mean no harm," she said, the words coming unbidden. Alexander turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "You sound certain." "I've worked with wolves at the conservation forest," Eleanor explained, unsure why she felt the need to justify her statement. "These ones are just watching us." Alexander studied her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. "Lower your weapons," he commanded his men, "but stay alert." The guards obeyed reluctantly, their tension evident. Eleanor focused again on the sensation flowing from the amulet, that strange awareness of the wolves' presence. They continued to track the procession but maintained their distance. "How did you come to work with wolves?" Alexander asked, falling back to ride beside her. His massive stallion made her mare seem like a pony in comparison. "My father," Eleanor answered, the words catching in her throat. "He was the head ranger at Ravenwood. He taught me everything about the forest and its creatures." She paused, memories flooding back. "He said I had a gift with them, that they responded to me differently than to others." "And your father is?" "Gone," she said simply. "He went on an expedition to the northern mountains 4 years ago and never returned. Diana was already his wife by then. She took over guardianship of me." Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see." They rode in silence for a while, the forest growing denser around them. The wolves had disappeared, but Eleanor could still feel their presence, watching from a distance. "The Blackthorn lands begin just beyond that ridge," Alexander said eventually, pointing with his staff to a distant line of craggy hills. "My kingdom is different from what you may expect." "Different how?" Eleanor asked. "We live by older ways," he replied, "traditions that the outside world has largely forgotten. The bond between ruler and land is more than symbolic for us." He fixed her with that intense gaze again. "That will be true for you as well, once you are queen." The word sent a shiver through Eleanor. Queen. The title seemed impossibly foreign, like a coat several sizes too large. As they crested the ridge, Eleanor gasped. Spread before them was a valley unlike any she'd seen before. Ancient forests of towering black pines, mist-shrouded meadows, and at the center, built into the very side of a mountain, a massive stone fortress. Blackthorn Citadel. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "And dangerous," Alexander added. "Beauty and danger often walk hand in hand in my kingdom." His words carried a warning, though whether about the land or himself, Eleanor couldn't be sure. The descent into the valley took them through increasingly primal forest. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wide as wagon wheels, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Moss-covered stones lined the path, carved with symbols Eleanor didn't recognize. "Boundary markers," Malcolm explained when he caught her staring. "Warnings to those who might enter with ill intent." "What do they say?" she asked. Roughly translated, "Blood answers to blood, trespass at your peril." Eleanor shivered despite the warmth of the day. The amulet at her throat grew warmer still, almost uncomfortably so. She wondered briefly if she should remove it, but the thought of being without her father's gift was more distressing than the heat against her skin. As they neared a narrow pass between two towering rock formations, a haunting howl echoed through the valley. The guards tensed, hands moving to weapons once more, but Alexander raised his staff in a gesture that stopped them. "The sentinels acknowledge our return," he said, then turned to Eleanor. "Tradition demands a response." Before she could ask what he meant, Alexander threw back his head and released a howl of his own, so powerful and primal that Eleanor felt it in her bones. The sound wasn't human. It contained harmonics impossible for a human throat to produce. The forest fell silent in the wake of his call. Then, after a breath, howls answered from all directions. Dozens of voices joined in chorus. "What?" Eleanor began, but her question died as a pack of wolves emerged from the trees ahead. These weren't like the timber wolves she knew from the conservation forest. They were massive beasts, their shoulders reaching a man's waist, with intelligent eyes that fixed on the riders with eerie awareness. The lead wolf, a silver male with scars crossing his muzzle, approached Alexander's stallion without fear. The horse remained steady, clearly accustomed to the wolf's presence. Alexander dismounted, his movements fluid despite his injured leg, and placed his hand on the wolf's head in a gesture that seemed almost ritualistic. "Greetings, old friend," he said, his voice carrying in the stillness. "I've returned with the one I sought." The wolf's gaze shifted to Eleanor, amber eyes assessing her with unnerving intelligence. Then, to her shock, the creature approached her mare. The horse trembled but didn't bolt as the wolf circled, sniffing the air around Eleanor. Without thinking, Eleanor extended her hand, palm down, as she would with the conservation wolves. The silver wolf stared at her outstretched fingers for a long moment, then pressed his muzzle against her hand. A jolt of something, energy, awareness, she had no name for it, surged through her body. Images flashed behind her eyes, moonlight on snow, the exhilaration of the hunt, the comfort of the pack. Then abruptly, a memory that couldn't be hers. A little girl with pale blonde hair, sleeping peacefully in a bed of furs, a wooden amulet clutched in her tiny fist. Eleanor gasped and pulled her hand back. The wolf made a sound almost like a chuckle, then turned and trotted back to the trees, his pack following. "What was that?" she demanded, her composure cracked by the strange experience. Alexander watched her with newfound interest. "That was Silver, alpha of the oldest pack in these mountains. He was greeting you." "Those images." Eleanor touched her temple, the foreign memories already fading like dreams upon waking. "I saw things when I touched him." Malcolm and Terence exchanged meaningful glances. Alexander's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes had sharpened with intensity. "What things?" he asked quietly. "A child," Eleanor said, struggling to hold on to the fleeting image. "A little girl with hair like mine, and this." She touched the amulet. She was holding this. A heavy silence fell over the group. Alexander's face had gone very still, his knuckles white where he gripped his silver staff. "We should continue," he said finally, his voice rough. "The day grows late, and we've still much ground to cover." He remounted with practiced efficiency, but Eleanor noticed a new tension in his shoulders. Whatever her vision meant, it had disturbed him deeply. The remainder of the journey passed in relative silence. Eleanor tried to absorb the increasing strangeness of her surroundings. The ancient trees, the wolves that occasionally appeared and disappeared like ghosts among the underbrush, the growing feeling that she had crossed a threshold into a world operating by rules she didn't understand. As they approached the fortress, Eleanor saw that what had appeared to be a single structure from a distance was actually a complex of buildings, towers, and walls built into and around the mountain face. Some sections looked ancient, constructed of massive stone blocks weathered by centuries, while others showed newer constructions seamlessly integrated with the old. Guards in silver-gray leathers stood at attention as the procession approached the main gate, a towering arch of black stone carved with the same wolf emblem that adorned Alexander's staff. They bowed deeply as the king passed, their eyes widening slightly at the sight of Eleanor. "News travels fast," Malcolm murmured to her. "They already know who you are." "And who am I, exactly?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old warrior's eyes crinkled at the corners. "The future queen, though I suspect you may be more than that, if Silver's reaction is any indication." Inside the gates, a courtyard bustled with activity that paused as the royal party entered. Stable hands rushed forward to take the horses, servants lined up in neat rows, and at the base of the wide stone steps leading to the main hall stood a woman who commanded attention without effort. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe braid, and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Her clothing was practical but finely made, leathers and wool in the blackthorn colors of gray and silver. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," she called, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard. Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, sharp and assessing. "I see your journey was successful." "Morgan," Alexander acknowledged with a nod. "This is Eleanor Silverheart, my betrothed. Eleanor, meet Morgan Wolfsbane, captain of my guard, and the only person in my kingdom who regularly disobeys my direct orders." Morgan's stern face cracked in a brief smile. "Someone must keep you honest, my king." She approached Eleanor's horse and offered a hand to help her dismount. "Welcome to Blackthorn, my lady. I hope you're ready for what awaits you here." The words held a warning that Eleanor couldn't decipher. "I'm not sure anyone could be truly ready for this place," she replied honestly. Morgan laughed, a surprisingly warm sound from such a formidable woman. "Well said. Honesty will serve you better than flattery in these walls." She lowered her voice. "The king has many advisers, but few who dare speak truth to him. Remember that." Before Eleanor could respond, Alexander appeared at her side. "Morgan will show you to your chambers. You'll want to rest before tonight's ceremony." "Ceremony?" Eleanor asked, sudden anxiety flickering through her. "Our wedding," he replied matter-of-factly. "The council has assembled, and tradition demands we formalize our union beneath the new moon." "Tonight?" Eleanor's voice rose despite her efforts to remain composed. "But we've only just arrived. I'm not prepared for—" "The preparations have been underway for weeks," Alexander cut her off, though not unkindly. "Your presence is all that was lacking." He hesitated, then added more softly, "I understand this is sudden, but in Blackthorn, alliances must be secured quickly and publicly." The political nature of their arrangement hit Eleanor anew. Of course, this wasn't about her specifically. She was merely the vessel for whatever alliance Alexander sought to cement. The thought should have been comforting in its pragmatism, yet she felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "As you wish, Alexander," she said, adopting the formal tone she'd heard Diana use with important visitors. Distance seemed the safest option. Something flickered in his eyes. Frustration, perhaps, or resignation. "Rest," he said again more gently. "Morgan will see that you have everything you need." With a slight bow, he turned and climbed the stone steps, his limp more pronounced after the long ride. Morgan watched him go with an expression Eleanor couldn't interpret. "Come, my lady," she said finally. "Let's get you settled." The corridors of Blackthorn Citadel were a maze of stone passages, some wide and well lit by iron sconces, others narrow and shadowed. Eleanor tried to memorize their path: 3 right turns, a long hallway with tapestries of hunting scenes, up a curved staircase, left past a courtyard visible through arched windows, but soon lost track. "You'll learn your way quickly enough," Morgan assured her, noticing her confusion, though some passages are meant to remain hidden from all but those with Blackthorn blood. "Why would passages be hidden within your own fortress?" Eleanor asked. Morgan's expression grew serious. "Because not all enemies are external, a lesson our king learned early and painfully." Before Eleanor could ask more, they arrived at a heavy wooden door banded with iron. Morgan produced a key from a chain at her belt and unlocked it with a solid click. "Your chambers," she announced, pushing open the door. Eleanor stepped into a suite of rooms that took her breath away. The main chamber was spacious, with a high ceiling supported by wooden beams carved with intricate wolf designs. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall, draped with furs and fine linens in shades of silver and deep blue. A fireplace large enough to stand in occupied another wall, already lit and warming the room. Arched windows overlooked the valley, now bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Through them, Eleanor could see the forest stretching to the horizon, wild and ancient. "The bathing chamber is through there," Morgan indicated a smaller door, "and your dressing room beyond it. Servants will bring hot water shortly, and Lydia will assist you with preparations for tonight." "Who is Lydia?" Eleanor asked, still overwhelmed by her surroundings. "Your lady's maid," Morgan replied, "chosen for her discretion and competence. She'll help you navigate court life." The warrior woman hesitated, then added, "The king assigned me to your personal guard as well. If you need anything, day or night, pull this cord by the door." Eleanor nodded, grateful for Morgan's direct manner amidst all the strangeness. "Thank you. May I ask, what should I expect tonight?" Morgan considered her question carefully. "The ceremony will follow ancient traditions. There will be vows exchanged, blood mingled, oaths sworn before the council and the spirits of the land." "Blood mingled?" Eleanor repeated, alarmed. "Just a token amount," Morgan assured her. "A small cut on each palm, pressed together to symbolize the joining of your lives and bloodlines." She paused. "It's considered a sacred bond among our people, more binding than any paper contract." Eleanor nodded slowly, fingering her wooden amulet for comfort. It had cooled since their arrival, returning to its normal temperature against her skin. Morgan's sharp eyes noticed the gesture. "That amulet? It's important to you?" "My father made it," Eleanor explained. "It's all I have left of him." Morgan stepped closer, her expression suddenly intense. "May I see it?" Reluctantly, Eleanor lifted the cord over her head and placed the wooden wolf in Morgan's calloused palm. The warrior woman examined it closely, turning it over to reveal the intricate carving on its underside, a crescent moon surrounded by a circle of ancient symbols. "Where did your father learn this pattern?" Morgan asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "He carved many things, but this was special. He said it would protect me when he couldn't." Morgan returned the amulet with a thoughtful expression. "Keep it close, especially tonight. Some protections are more powerful than we understand." With those cryptic words, she left Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the growing shadows of evening. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Servants arrived with steaming water for the copper tub in the bathing chamber. Lydia, a quiet young woman with efficient hands, helped Eleanor wash away the dust of travel and dressed her in garments unlike any she'd worn before. The wedding gown was surprisingly simple in design, though made of fabric finer than Eleanor had ever touched. A soft silver blue that shimmered in the firelight, embroidered with subtle patterns that resembled frost on a window pane. The sleeves fell to points over her hands, and the neckline was modest but elegant. "The traditional color of Blackthorn brides," Lydia explained as she fastened tiny pearl buttons up Eleanor's spine. "It represents the winter moon, which guides even in the darkest night." When Eleanor was dressed, Lydia arranged her pale blonde hair in a simple style, woven with tiny silver beads and small white flowers. "Moon blossoms," the maid said when Eleanor asked about the blooms. "They open only at night. Very rare, very precious." Finally, Lydia presented a small silver box. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay a delicate circlet of silver branches interwoven with what looked like frozen droplets of water, but must have been clear gemstones. "The Queen's crown," Lydia whispered reverently, "not worn since the last queen died 15 years ago." Eleanor stared at the beautiful alien object. "I can't wear this," she protested. I'm just—" "You are what the king has chosen," Lydia said firmly, lifting the circlet and placing it carefully on Eleanor's head. Its weight was surprising, though not uncomfortable. "And soon you will be what the land acknowledges." A knock at the door interrupted them. Morgan entered, now dressed in formal leathers embossed with the blackthorn wolf. Her eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of Eleanor. "The ancestral spirits smile on you tonight, my lady," she said. "You look as though you were born to wear the crown." Eleanor doubted that very much, but she merely nodded, too nervous for words. Her wooden amulet hung hidden beneath her gown, a comforting weight against her heart. "It's time," Morgan announced. "The council and the king await in the great hall." Eleanor followed Morgan through more stone corridors, now lit with hundreds of torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Guards stood at attention as they passed, their expressions solemn. They paused before a set of massive doors, carved with scenes of wolves running beneath a full moon. Eleanor could hear the murmur of many voices beyond. "Remember," Morgan said quietly, "speak your vows clearly. When the king offers his blood, do not hesitate to offer yours in return, and whatever happens, do not show fear." "Whatever happens," Eleanor repeated. "What might happen?" Morgan's expression was unreadable. "Our ceremonies sometimes take unexpected turns. Trust your instincts." Before Eleanor could question her further, the great doors swung open. A hush fell over the assembled crowd as all eyes turned toward her. The great hall was vast, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows above. Massive hearths blazed at either end, casting a warm glow over the hundreds of people gathered in their finest attire. Stone columns carved like ancient trees supported the ceiling, and between them, banner-sized tapestries depicted scenes from Blackthorn history. At the far end of the hall, on a dais of dark stone, stood Alexander. Gone was the travel-worn warrior from their journey. In his place stood a king in the fullest sense of the word, resplendent in black leathers and a mantle of silver fur that fell from his broad shoulders to the floor. His silver staff stood beside him, gleaming in the firelight, and upon his brow rested a crown of twisted silver branches matching Eleanor's circlet, though larger and set with amber stones that caught the light like flames. Even with his pronounced limp as he stepped forward, he commanded the room with his presence alone. The crowd parted before Eleanor like water around a stone as Morgan led her toward the dais. Alexander's eyes never left her face as she approached, their stormy gray depths unreadable. When she reached him, he extended his hand. Eleanor placed her trembling fingers in his palm, surprised by the warmth of his skin. "You honor Blackthorn with your presence," he said formally, his deep voice carrying to the farthest corners of the hall. "I come freely to honor our covenant," Eleanor replied, the words Lydia had taught her falling from her lips with surprising ease. Alexander turned to address the gathered crowd. "People of Blackthorn, we gather beneath the new moon to witness the joining of bloodlines. I present to you Eleanor Silverheart, who comes to be your queen." A murmur rippled through the assembly, not entirely approving. Eleanor caught fragments of whispered concerns. Outsider, unknown bloodline, dangerous times for unknown alliances. If Alexander heard the whispers, he gave no sign. He guided Eleanor up the 3 steps to the dais, where an old man in robes of midnight blue waited. In his gnarled hands, he held an ancient leather-bound book and a silver dagger with a wolf's head pommel. "Elder Malcolm will officiate the ceremony," Alexander told her quietly. Eleanor blinked in surprise, looking more closely at the robed figure. It was indeed Malcolm, the warrior advisor from their journey, though he seemed transformed by his ceremonial garb and solemn bearing. "We stand before the ancient spirits of mountain and forest," Malcolm began, his weathered voice strong with authority. "We stand before the moon who witnesses all truths. We stand before the assembled council of Blackthorn to join two souls, two bloodlines, two futures into one." He opened the ancient book, its pages yellowed with age. "Alexander Blackthorn, Alpha of the North, guardian of the old ways, do you choose this woman as your mate, your queen, your other half in darkness and in light?" "I so choose," Alexander replied firmly. "Eleanor Silverheart," Malcolm continued, turning to her, "do you choose this man as your mate, your king, your other half in darkness and in light?" Eleanor felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. The political nature of this arrangement was clear, yet the ceremony spoke of deeper bonds than mere alliance. She met Alexander's gaze and found something unexpected there. Not love, certainly, but a sincerity that steadied her resolve. "I so choose," she answered, her voice stronger than she expected. Malcolm nodded in approval. "Then let blood speak to blood, as is our way." He presented the silver dagger to Alexander, who took it with practiced ease. Without hesitation, Alexander drew the blade across his palm, opening a clean line that welled with dark blood. He then offered the dagger to Eleanor, handle first. Eleanor accepted the weapon, feeling its weight, the responsibility it represented. Following Alexander's example, she drew the blade across her own palm, wincing slightly at the sharp sting. Blood rose to the surface of the cut, bright red against her pale skin. Alexander extended his bleeding palm. "Blood to blood," he said, "life to life." Eleanor placed her injured hand against his, their blood mingling. "Blood to blood," she echoed. "Life to life." A curious sensation spread up her arm from the point of contact. Warmth, then heat, then something like lightning racing through her veins. The wooden amulet beneath her gown suddenly burned against her chest, as though responding to the blood ritual. Around them, the crowd gasped. Eleanor followed their startled gazes to her joined hands with Alexander. A faint silver light pulsed where their blood mingled, growing stronger with each heartbeat. Malcolm's eyes widened. "The blood acknowledges," he murmured, then raised his voice. "The blood acknowledges. Blackthorn accepts its queen." The hall erupted in exclamations of surprise and awe. Alexander stared at their joined hands, his expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been triumph. "What's happening?" Eleanor whispered, fighting the urge to pull away from the strange light. "Something unexpected," he replied quietly, "but not unwelcome." Before he could explain further, a commotion broke out at the far end of the hall. The great doors burst open, admitting a gust of cold wind that set the torches flickering. A man staggered in, his clothing torn and bloodied, his face a mask of exhaustion and fear. "Attack!" he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "Eastern border! Ambush! Lord Harwick leads them!" Alexander's grip on Eleanor's hand tightened painfully. "Harwick?" he growled, the name transformed into something inhuman by his tone. The messenger struggled to continue, blood seeping from a wound in his side. "Says he comes, for what's his? The girl. The amulet." Eleanor's free hand flew to her throat, feeling the outline of the wooden wolf beneath her gown. How could Harwick know about her father's gift? Alexander released her hand and strode forward, his limp forgotten in the surge of rage that seemed to emanate from him like heat from fire. "Morgan, muster the guard," he commanded. "Malcolm, secure the eastern passages. Terence, get our scouts to Raven's Pass." The hall dissolved into organized chaos as warriors moved to obey their king's orders. Alexander turned back to Eleanor, his eyes now burning with a fierce golden light that was decidedly not human. "It seems our wedding night must wait," he said grimly. "Harwick has made his move sooner than I anticipated." "What does he want with me?" Eleanor asked, fear and confusion warring in her mind. "I'm nothing to him, just Diana's unwanted burden." Alexander's expression darkened. "You are far more than that, Eleanor Silverheart. It seems I am not the only one who recognized the truth of your bloodline." "My bloodline? What are you talking about?" But Alexander's attention had already shifted to the tactical discussion around him. It was Morgan who approached Eleanor, taking her arm firmly. "Come, my queen," she said, the title no longer ceremonial. "We must get you to safety until we know the extent of the threat." As Morgan led her from the great hall through a hidden passage behind the tapestries, Eleanor felt the world tilting beneath her feet. This morning, she had been a nobody in a backwater village. Now she was a queen, a target, and apparently the bearer of some bloodline significant enough to incite an armed attack. The wooden amulet still burned against her skin, as if awakened by the blood ritual. Something was happening, something her father had perhaps foreseen when he carved the wolf talisman and placed it around her neck 4 years ago. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked as they descended a narrow spiral staircase lit only by Morgan's torch. "To the heart of the mountain," Morgan replied grimly. "The oldest and most defensible part of the citadel, the place where Blackthorn kings have protected their most valuable treasures for centuries. And that's where I'm to stay? Like some piece of royal jewelry?" Morgan's stern face softened momentarily. "No, my lady. You're there because it's the one place Alexander believes Lord Harwick cannot reach. The one place where the power in your blood might be safe until you learn to wield it." "Power in my blood?" Eleanor repeated, bewildered. "I have no power. I'm just—" "You are not just anything," Morgan interrupted firmly. "The light of your joining with Alexander proves that. And that wooden amulet you wear, the one your father gave you, bears the royal seal of the Eastern Kingdom, thought destroyed in the Great War 20 years ago." Eleanor stumbled, nearly falling down the stone steps. "The Eastern Kingdom? But that would mean—" "Yes," Morgan confirmed, steadying her. "If I am right, and I rarely am wrong in such matters, you are the lost princess of the East, the child spirited away when Harwick betrayed his own people and slaughtered the royal family, the rightful heir to the Eastern territories." "That's impossible," Eleanor whispered, though even as she denied it, pieces began falling into place. Her father's mysterious past, Diana's inexplicable hatred, the strange connection she'd always felt to the wilderness. "Less impossible than you might think," came a new voice from the darkness below. Morgan raised her torch higher, revealing a figure waiting at the bottom of the stairs. An old man, bent with age, his white beard reaching nearly to his waist. But his eyes were sharp, alert, and fixed on Eleanor with unnerving intensity. "Gabriel," Morgan acknowledged with a respectful nod. "The king sent word?" "The king need not send word for me to know when the daughter of James and Aurora Silvermoon returns to claim her birthright," the old man replied, his gaze never leaving Eleanor's face. "I have waited 20 years for this moment. Come, princess. There is much you must learn, and I fear we have precious little time." As Eleanor descended the final steps toward this stranger who seemed to know more about her than she knew herself, the wooden amulet pulsed against her skin like a second heartbeat. For the first time since leaving her small cabin that morning, she felt a strange certainty rising within her. Whatever truth awaited in the heart of the mountain, it was a truth she had been born to face. Torchlight flickered against ancient stone walls as Gabriel led Eleanor deeper into the mountain's heart. The passageway narrowed, forcing Morgan to walk behind them. The old man moved with surprising agility, his gnarled hand occasionally brushing the wall symbols that glowed faintly at his touch. "These tunnels predate the fortress above," Gabriel explained, his voice echoing slightly. "Carved when the first Blackthorn king made his covenant with the forest spirits." Eleanor's mind still reeled from Morgan's revelation. A princess? The lost heir to the Eastern Kingdom? It seemed impossible, yet something resonated within her at the words, like a bell struck at exactly the right frequency. "If what you say is true," she ventured, "why wasn't I told? Why raise me as a forester's daughter?" Gabriel paused at an intersection of tunnels, considering her with eyes that seemed to glow in the torchlight. "To keep you alive, child. Harwick's betrayal was thorough. He hunted every member of the Eastern royal family, determined to extinguish your bloodline forever." "But why? What threat could I possibly pose?" "The greatest threat of all," the old man replied cryptically, "the possibility of unity." Before Eleanor could press for clarification, they arrived at a circular chamber cut directly from the living rock of the mountain. The space was warm despite its depth, heated by a natural hot spring that bubbled in a small pool at its center. Shelves carved into the walls held ancient tomes, scrolls, and artifacts whose purpose Eleanor could not begin to guess. "The Chamber of Echoes," Morgan said from behind them. "Few beyond the royal family have ever seen it." Gabriel gestured toward a stone bench near the pool. "Sit, child. The king will join us shortly, but time is precious." Eleanor obeyed, drawn to the strange peacefulness of the chamber despite the chaos unfolding above. The wooden amulet had cooled against her skin, but still felt oddly alive, like a dormant creature waiting to wake. "You must understand your heritage before you can wield its power," Gabriel said, selecting a scroll from the wall. He unrolled it carefully to reveal a map unlike any Eleanor had seen. the kingdoms rendered not as political boundaries, but as flowing energies, colors blending and separating across the landscape. 500 years ago, he began, these lands were one kingdom, ruled by those who understood the balance between human and beast, between civilization and wilderness. They were called the dual-blooded, for they carried both human intelligence and primal power. He tapped a central point on the map where all colors converged. From this sacred place, they maintained harmony throughout the realm, but as generations passed, division arose. Some believed human cities and laws should prevail. Others argued for the supremacy of the wild ways. Eleanor studied the map, noticing how the colors gradually separated, forming distinct territories. The kingdoms split, she surmised. Yes, the Great Sundering. Your ancestors led those who valued the ancient connection to the forest spirits, becoming the Eastern Kingdom. The Blackthorns led those who prioritized human advancement while still honoring the old ways, forming the Northern Kingdom. And the others? Eleanor asked, noting other territories on the map. The Western Kingdom chose isolation, retreating into their mountain fortresses. The Southern Kingdom embraced only their human nature, rejecting the beast blood entirely. Gabriel's face darkened. Each choice carried consequences, but despite their differences, a delicate peace held for centuries through sacred oaths and carefully arranged marriages. The wooden amulet warmed suddenly against Eleanor's skin as Gabriel continued. Until 20 years ago, when Lord Harwick, younger brother to the Eastern King, made a terrible pact with dark forces from beyond our lands. He sought power without balance, dominion without responsibility. He betrayed his own family, Morgan added, her voice tight with old anger. Slaughtered them during what should have been a celebration, the birth of the king's daughter. Eleanor's hand unconsciously rose to her throat, fingers finding the amulet. Me. Yes, Gabriel confirmed. But one man foresaw Harwick's treachery. Your father's most trusted ranger, William Silverheart, spirited you away that bloody night. My father wasn't my father? The question tore from Eleanor's throat, sharp with sudden grief. William Silverheart was your father in every way that matters, Gabriel said gently. He sacrificed everything to protect you, including his identity. In truth, he was James Silvermoon, your true father and rightful king of the Eastern Territories, believed dead these 20 years. The chamber spun around Eleanor, past and present colliding with dizzying force. That's not possible, she whispered. My father went missing 4 years ago, not 20. Morgan stepped forward. The man who raised you was indeed William Silverheart, the king's most trusted ranger and blood brother. When James realized Harwick's betrayal was imminent, he entrusted you to William, who raised you as his own. The deception protected you both. Then where is my true father? Eleanor demanded. Is he truly dead? Before either could answer, the heavy stone door swung open. Alexander entered, still in his ceremonial attire, though now bearing a sword at his hip. His face was grim, eyes stormy with contained fury. Harwick's forces have breached the outer villages, he announced without preamble. They burn and pillage as they come, driving terrified villagers before them as human shields. The coward's tactic hasn't changed, Morgan growled. Alexander's gaze found Eleanor, softening slightly. Are you all right? She laughed, a brittle sound that surprised even her. I've just learned everything I believed about myself is a lie. My father wasn't my father, and apparently I'm some lost princess with mysterious blood powers. No, Alexander, I am not all right. To her surprise, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. At least fear hasn't stolen your spirit. He turned to Gabriel. Have you shown her? The old man shook his head. We were explaining her lineage. The demonstration can wait no longer, however. Harwick's attack forces our hand. Alexander nodded grimly, then approached Eleanor. What they've told you is true. You are Eleanor Silvermoon, rightful queen of the Eastern Territories. Your blood carries power that has been dormant, protected by the amulet your father, your true father, created before his disappearance. And where is he now? Eleanor asked again, desperately seeking one truth to cling to amid the swirling uncertainty. That, Alexander said carefully, is what we hoped you might help us discover. He held out his hand. May I see the amulet? Eleanor hesitated, then lifted the cord from around her neck, placing the wooden wolf in Alexander's palm. The carved animal seemed to watch her with knowing eyes. Alexander examined it closely, then carried it to the hot spring at the chamber's center. Water reveals what fire creates, he murmured, then submerged the amulet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the pool's surface began to glow with soft silver light. Alexander withdrew the amulet, now shining as though moonlight had been captured in the wood. "The royal seal," Gabriel whispered reverently. Alexander returned to Eleanor, holding the glowing amulet before her. "This was crafted with ancient magic, magic of the blood and the moon. It has protected you by concealing your true nature, even from yourself. But now it is time for the truth to emerge." He took her hand, placing the amulet in her palm and closing her fingers around it. "Feel your heritage, Eleanor. Remember who you truly are." The sensation began as warmth, spreading from her palm up her arm, then heat, racing through her veins like liquid fire. The chamber around her blurred and shifted. Suddenly she was no longer there, but running through moonlit forest, paws silent on moss-covered ground, the night alive with scents and sounds no human could detect. She was wolf and woman, beast and human, united in one form, one consciousness. The forest welcomed her, recognized her as its own. She threw back her head and howled, the sound carrying both triumph and belonging. The vision shifted. A man with kind eyes and her pale blonde hair held a tiny infant, placing the wooden amulet around her neck with trembling hands. "Hide her true nature," he whispered, "until she is ready to reclaim what is hers." His face contorted with grief and determination. "Keep her safe, old friend." Another shift, and she saw William, her foster father, fleeing through the night, clutching a bundle to his chest. Behind him, flames consumed a grand castle, screams echoing in the darkness. The visions came faster now. William raising her in the isolated cabin, strange visitors in the night, her foster father teaching her the ways of the forest and its creatures, his growing fear as she neared adulthood and her powers began to stir, his final decision to journey north, seeking Alexander's help. With a gasp, Eleanor returned to the present, finding herself on her knees in the Chamber of Echoes. Alexander knelt beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. "Everything," she breathed. "My father, James, gave me to William to protect me. And William, he was going to you when he disappeared." She looked up at Alexander, sudden understanding dawning. "That's why you came for me. You knew who I was all along." Alexander nodded. "William reached us, but he was mortally wounded. Harwick's assassins had tracked him. Before he died, he told me where to find you and made me swear to protect you until you could reclaim your birthright." "And marrying me?" Eleanor asked, a new suspicion forming. "Was that part of his plan too?" "No," Alexander replied, his voice softening. "That was my decision. The only way to give you the full protection of Blackthorn law was to make you my queen." He hesitated. "Though I admit there were political advantages. The union of North and East could restore balance to these lands, as it was in the beginning." Eleanor stood, her legs surprisingly steady, given the revelations crashing through her. The amulet still glowed in her palm, its light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Harwick marches on your kingdom. I've only just learned who I am. I have no army, no power, no—" "You have more power than you know," Gabriel interrupted, approaching with a small wooden box. "It is time you understood the true legacy of the Eastern royal line." He opened the box to reveal a silver ring set with a clear stone that seemed to shift between white and palest blue as the light struck it. "This is the Moonstone Ring, worn by Eastern rulers for generations. It amplifies the abilities in your blood." "What abilities?" Eleanor asked, though something deep within already knew the answer. "The Eastern bloodline carries the strongest connection to the primal world," Gabriel explained. "Where the Blackthorns can shift their form from human to wolf at will, your line can do far more. You can communicate with all forest creatures. You can see through their eyes, borrow their strength, call them to your aid." "The Forest Speaker," Morgan said with quiet reverence. "That is your true title, passed down through your mother's line." Eleanor recalled the strange connection she'd always felt with the wolves at Ravenwood, how animals seemed to understand her intentions without training. It hadn't seemed extraordinary then, merely a skill learned from her father. Now she understood it was far more. "Harwick fears this power above all others," Alexander said. "It is why he sought to exterminate your family line completely. The creatures of the wild cannot be bribed or threatened. They answer only to the Forest Speaker, and they are legion." Gabriel offered the ring to Eleanor. With the amulet awakened and the ring restored to your hand, you can claim your full heritage. But be warned, power awakened cannot be easily subdued again. The changes that come will be permanent. Eleanor stared at the ring, its stone seeming to call to her blood. What changes? Your human and beast natures will no longer be separate, Alexander answered. You will exist in both worlds simultaneously, never fully one or the other again. It is a burden and a gift. Before Eleanor could respond, the chamber door burst open again. Terence rushed in, his usual composure shattered. "Your Majesty," he gasped. "Harwick's forces have breached the outer wall. They're using some kind of fire we can't extinguish, and—" He hesitated, glancing at Eleanor. "Speak plainly," Alexander commanded. "They have Diana Blackwood with them. She guides them through the forest paths, showing them the secret ways." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "Diana is working with Harwick?" "It appears she always was," Alexander said grimly. "The arrangement with Harwick wasn't chance. She was placed in your life to watch you, to ensure you never discovered your true nature." The betrayal cut deep, though Eleanor realized she should have expected it. Diana's inexplicable hatred, her constant belittling, her eagerness to be rid of her stepdaughter, all made terrible sense now. Alexander turned to Morgan. "How long can we hold them?" "Hours at most," she replied. "The central fortress is strong, but if they've breached the outer wall already—" "Then we have no choice," Alexander said, his gaze finding Eleanor. "The decision is yours, but it must be made now. Take the ring and awaken your power, or we retreat through the mountain passages and hope to outrun Harwick's forces." Eleanor looked down at the glowing amulet in one hand, the moonstone ring in the other. The weight of choice pressed upon her like a physical force. She was no queen, no warrior. Until today, she had been nothing but a forester's daughter with strange affinity for wolves. Yet as she hesitated, memories surfaced. Not the visions from the amulet, but her own experiences. The quiet strength she'd found surviving Diana's cruelty. The wisdom learned from the forest and its creatures. The inner voice that had sustained her through loneliness and loss. "Find your strength in stillness," her father had said. Both fathers, she realized now, had taught her the same truth in different ways. Eleanor slipped the moonstone ring onto her finger. Power surged through her instantly, a tidal wave of sensation that drove the breath from her lungs. The chamber around her dissolved into pure light. She felt her consciousness expanding, racing outward from the mountain in all directions, touching thousands of minds. The wolves in the forest, the eagles soaring above, the bears in their dens, the foxes in their burrows. She felt their surprise at her presence, then recognition, then a joyous welcome as ancient memories awakened in their collective awareness. The forest speaker had returned. Through the eyes of a hawk circling high above, Eleanor saw Harwick's army surrounding the fortress, their torches creating a ring of fire in the gathering dusk. Through a wolf's keen senses, she smelled the strange, oily substance they used to create unquenchable flames. Through a fox's ears, she heard Diana's voice directing soldiers to a hidden entrance on the fortress's western flank. Then she was back in her body, gasping, the world around her sharper and more vivid than before. She could smell Alexander's concern, hear Morgan's heartbeat quicken, taste Gabriel's satisfaction in the air. "What did you see?" Alexander asked, steadying her with a strong hand. "Everything," Eleanor replied, her voice altered, harmonics of wolf and woman blending. "Harwick surrounds us with nearly 500 men. They use oil from the southern bogs to fuel their fire. Diana leads a force to the western tunnel entrance." "Impossible," Morgan breathed. "That entrance is known only to the royal guard." "Diana learned many secrets during her years in service to Harwick," Eleanor said, knowledge flowing into her mind from sources she couldn't identify. She was his creature long before she married William. Alexander's face darkened with rage. "We trusted her as William's wife. She used that trust to spy, and now to betray." He turned to Morgan. "Take 20 of your best to the western tunnel. Hold it at all costs." "And what of you, my king?" Morgan asked. Alexander's gaze met Eleanor's, something like wonder crossing his features. "I believe my queen has a plan." Eleanor nodded, certainty flowing through her veins alongside the awakened power. "I do, but I'll need your help and Gabriel's knowledge." As Morgan departed to defend the western tunnel, Eleanor quickly outlined what she had in mind. The old man's eyes widened, then crinkled with appreciation. "Audacious," Gabriel chuckled. "Your mother would approve." Alexander's reaction was more measured. "It's dangerous. You've only just awakened your power. To attempt something of this scale—" "We have no choice," Eleanor countered. "Harwick must believe he's won if we're to turn his own strategy against him." After a moment's hesitation, Alexander nodded. "Very well. What do you need from me?" "The primal ceremony," Gabriel interjected before Eleanor could answer. "If you're to attempt this, you'll need the full strength of both bloodlines." He looked between them significantly. "The union must be completed." Eleanor frowned. "We just had the ceremony. Our blood mingled—" "That was the human ritual," Gabriel explained. "For what you propose, you need the primal bond as well, the joining of souls that transcends flesh." Alexander's expression remained carefully neutral. "The choice is yours, Eleanor. The primal ceremony would bind us on a level few can comprehend. It cannot be undone." Eleanor studied the man before her, this king who had sought her out, who had honored her choice from their first meeting, who now stood ready to risk everything to protect his people and help her claim her birthright. Not love, perhaps, but something equally powerful was growing between them. "What must we do?" she asked. Gabriel gestured to the hot spring. "Both of you must enter the sacred waters. The ritual is ancient and simple, but the consequences are eternal. Your souls will recognize each other across any distance, any barrier, even death itself." Alexander's eyes never left Eleanor's. "Are you certain? This goes beyond our political arrangement." Eleanor removed the glowing amulet from around her neck, setting it carefully beside the pool. "I'm certain," she said simply. The ritual itself was indeed simple. They entered the hot spring fully clothed, the mineral-rich water immediately soaking through the fine fabrics of their wedding attire. Gabriel spoke words in a language Eleanor somehow understood, though she'd never heard it before. The primal tongue, the first language of their ancestors. As the final words echoed in the chamber, Alexander took Eleanor's hands in his. "Spirit to spirit," he said. "Soul to soul. Heart to heart," Eleanor responded, the words coming unbidden. "Life to life." They submerged themselves completely in the sacred waters. Beneath the surface, Eleanor opened her eyes to find Alexander watching her, his own eyes now glowing with the same amber fire she'd glimpsed during the wedding ceremony. Without thought, she pressed her lips to his. The connection was instant and overwhelming. Their souls touched, merged, danced together in a space beyond physical reality. She saw his childhood, felt his pain when his father died, experienced his loneliness as king. He witnessed her struggles with Diana, shared her grief at William's disappearance, understood her quiet determination to survive. When they emerged from the waters, gasping for air, Eleanor felt the change immediately. Alexander's presence resonated within her like a second heartbeat. She could sense his emotions, his thoughts hovering just beyond conscious perception. "It is done," Gabriel said solemnly. "The northern and eastern bloodlines are truly united for the first time in 5 centuries. Alexander helped Eleanor from the pool, his touch lingering. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she replied, surprised to find it was true, despite the strangeness of their new connection. "It feels—" "Right," he finished for her, "as though a missing piece has been restored." Gabriel cleared his throat. "Time grows short. If your plan is to succeed, we must move quickly." The next hour passed in focused preparation. Eleanor changed into practical attire provided by Gabriel, leathers and wool in the eastern colors of forest green and silver. Around her shoulders, she draped a cloak lined with wolf fur that seemed to enhance her connection to the forest creatures waiting beyond the mountain walls. Alexander donned his battle armor, the black metal inlaid with silver runes of protection. His injured leg seemed to trouble him less now, perhaps due to the primal ceremony or simply the urgency of their situation. Through her expanded senses, Eleanor monitored Harwick's forces as they tightened their grip around the fortress. The western tunnel had been breached despite Morgan's valiant defense. Enemy soldiers now moved through the lower levels, making their way toward the central keep. "They'll reach the throne room within the hour," she reported. "Harwick leads them personally." "And Diana?" Alexander asked, securing his sword belt. "With him. She seeks something in your private chambers as well." Eleanor concentrated, borrowing the keen hearing of a mouse hiding in the wall hangings. "The amulet. She tells him it must be destroyed to prevent my awakening." Alexander's laugh held no humor. Too late for that. Gabriel approached with a small leather pouch. "The final element you requested," he said, handing it to Eleanor. Use it sparingly. Its effects cannot be undone. Eleanor nodded, securing the pouch at her belt. It's time. Harwick expects to find us in the throne room, making our last stand. Then let us not disappoint him, Alexander replied grimly, though the ending may not be what he anticipates. They made their way upward through secret passages known only to Blackthorn royalty, emerging finally in a small antechamber behind the throne room. Already they could hear the sounds of fighting in the corridors beyond as the remaining loyal guards engaged Harwick's forces. Eleanor closed her eyes, extending her consciousness outward once more. Through the senses of a raven perched on a window ledge, she confirmed that the forest surrounding the fortress now teemed with hidden life: wolves, bears, lynx, and countless smaller creatures, all awaiting her command. "They're nearly here," she whispered, opening her eyes. "Diana leads them directly to us. She knows these passages too well." Alexander's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Through their bond, she felt his unwavering resolve, his absolute faith in her plan despite its risks. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "know that Blackthorn stands with you. I stand with you." The simple declaration warmed Eleanor more than any passionate avowal could have. She squeezed his hand once, then released it, stepping forward to take her position. "Remember," she said, "let Harwick believe he's won until I give the signal." Alexander nodded, moving to the ornate throne, while Eleanor concealed herself behind a heavy tapestry. Not a moment too soon, the massive doors burst open, and Lord Harwick swept into the throne room surrounded by armed men. Diana Blackwood walked at his side, her face alight with malicious triumph. "King Alexander," Harwick called, his voice smooth as oil yet sharp as a blade. "How kind of you to await us on your throne. It saves us the trouble of hunting you through these dreary passages." Alexander remained seated, his posture deceptively relaxed, though Eleanor could feel his tightly leashed fury through their bond. "Lord Harwick, I would say this visit is unexpected, but we both know that would be a lie." Harwick smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. Eyes, Eleanor noted with shock, that held the same amber glow as Alexander's when his primal nature stirred. This man shared the ancient bloodline, though his was clearly corrupted by whatever dark pact Gabriel had mentioned. "Where is the girl?" Harwick demanded, dispensing with pretense. "My property, stolen by your manipulations." "Your property?" Alexander's voice remained calm, almost amused. "I was unaware people could be owned in these territories. Perhaps things are different in whatever hell you've pledged your allegiance to." Harwick's smile vanished. "Do not test me, cripple. Your fortress falls. Your soldiers die. You have nothing left but your misplaced pride." He gestured to Diana. "This woman has told me everything. How you sought the Eastern Princess. How you planned to unite the bloodlines." Diana stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted with hatred. "Where is she? Where is the ungrateful wretch I was forced to raise as my own?" Eleanor remained hidden, though every instinct screamed to confront the woman who had made her childhood a misery. "Not yet," she reminded herself. "Let Harwick reveal all his secrets first." "The girl you speak of is under my protection," Alexander replied coolly. "As king, that is both my right and my duty." Harwick laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the vast chamber. "King? You rule a remnant, Alexander, a shadow of what the northern territories once were." He paced forward, stopping at the foot of the dais. "But I offer you a choice. Give me the girl and the amulet, and you may keep your pitiful throne. Refuse, and I will take everything, including your life." "Why?" Alexander asked, leaning forward slightly. "What threat could one girl possibly pose to someone of your obvious power?" The subtle mockery in his tone did not go unnoticed. Harwick's face darkened. "Do not play ignorant. You know what she is, what her bloodline represents." He gestured sharply, and his soldiers fanned out around the room's perimeter. "The forest speaker must not rise again. The old ways must remain buried." "Because they threaten your arrangement with your dark benefactors," Alexander surmised. "Whoever granted you that corruption flowing through your veins." "Advancement," Harwick corrected sharply. "Evolution beyond the primitive beast worship of our ancestors. The future belongs to those who control nature, not those who submit to it." Diana moved closer to the throne, her gaze darting to the shadows behind it. "Enough talk. The girl must be nearby. The amulet, too." She sniffed the air like a predator. "I can sense her. Always could, despite that woodcarver's pathetic attempts to mask her scent." Eleanor felt a surge of protective rage at the dismissive reference to William. Through their bond, she sensed Alexander warning her to remain calm, to stick to the plan. "Your final answer, King Alexander?" Harwick demanded. "The girl and the amulet, or your life and crown?" Alexander rose slowly from the throne, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. "I choose neither, Lord Harwick. Instead, I choose the future our ancestors envisioned, balance between worlds, harmony between bloodlines." His voice strengthened, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "I choose Eleanor Silvermoon, rightful queen of the Eastern Territories and my true mate." The signal given, Eleanor stepped from behind the tapestry. The room fell silent as she moved to stand beside Alexander. She felt rather than saw the shock ripple through Harwick's forces. "Impossible!" Diana hissed. "The amulet, I made sure she never—" "Failed," Eleanor finished for her. "Like everything else you've attempted, Diana." She raised her hand, displaying the moonstone ring. "I know who I am now. What I am." Harwick recovered quickly, his face contorting with rage. "Kill them! Kill them both!" His soldiers surged forward, weapons drawn. Alexander drew his sword in a fluid motion, stepping protectively in front of Eleanor. But she gently moved him aside, her eyes never leaving Harwick's face. "I wouldn't," she said calmly. The attackers hesitated, something in her voice giving them pause. Eleanor raised her hand, palm outward, fingers spread. Through the primal bond, she felt Alexander's energy flowing into her, strengthening her connection to the wilderness beyond the stone walls. "The old ways aren't dead, Lord Harwick," she said, her voice carrying strange harmonics that echoed through the chamber. "They've merely been waiting, as have I, as have they." With that, she released the call that had been building within her since the ceremony in the sacred pool. It burst from her in a silent wave of energy, racing through stone and wood, earth and air, reaching every creature that had gathered at her earlier summons. The response was immediate. Through the high windows of the throne room came dozens of ravens and falcons, their wings creating a storm of movement above the startled soldiers. The massive doors burst open again, this time admitting wolves that slipped like shadows between the legs of Harwick's men. From hidden passages emerged foxes, badgers, and even the massive brown bear that Eleanor had sensed hibernating in the mountains. "What is this?" Harwick demanded, his confidence cracking for the first time. "This," Eleanor replied, "is the voice of the forest you sought to silence." She moved forward, the animals parting before her like water. "These are my true subjects, Lord Harwick, and they remember what you did to their speaker's family." Diana backed away, her face a mask of terror as a wolf growled at her heels. "This isn't possible. The amulet kept her powers dormant. I made sure of it." "The amulet protected me until I was ready," Eleanor corrected, "as my father intended, as both my fathers ensured." Harwick's men were retreating now, dropping weapons as birds dive-bombed their heads and wolves snapped at their legs. But Harwick himself stood his ground, his eyes flaring with unnatural light. "I destroyed your bloodline once," he snarled, his face beginning to shift, elongating grotesquely into something neither wolf nor human, but a monstrous hybrid. "I can do it again." He lunged forward with inhuman speed, clawed hands extended toward Eleanor's throat. But Alexander was faster, interposing himself between them, his sword flashing in the torchlight. The blade caught Harwick across the chest, drawing first blood. Harwick howled in pain and rage, the sound causing several of Eleanor's animal allies to retreat in momentary confusion. He used the opportunity to strike again, this time catching Alexander's sword arm with his claws, ripping through armor and flesh. Eleanor felt the pain through their bond as if it were her own. Instinctively, she reached for the leather pouch Gabriel had given her. "The Eastern bloodline carries many gifts," she said, opening the pouch to reveal a fine silver powder, including knowledge of the old magics. As Harwick charged again, she threw the powder into his face. He screamed, a sound of pure agony as the substance burned his corrupted flesh. He staggered backward, clawing at his eyes. "Silver and moonstone," Eleanor explained calmly. "Purified in spring water under the full moon. The antithesis of whatever darkness flows through your veins." Alexander had recovered his stance, blood dripping from his wounded arm, but his sword steady. Around them, Harwick's soldiers were in full retreat, pursued by Eleanor's animal guardians. Only Diana remained, her back pressed against a pillar, eyes wide with terror and hatred. "It's over, Harwick," Alexander declared. "Surrender, and you may yet face justice rather than execution." But the corrupted lord was beyond reason. With a roar that shook dust from the rafters, he charged forward in blind fury. Alexander met the charge, his sword driving deep into Harwick's chest. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Harwick stood impaled on Alexander's blade, his monstrous features frozen in shock. Then, incredibly, he began to laugh, blood bubbling from his lips. "Fool," he gasped. "My masters don't allow death so easily." Before either Alexander or Eleanor could react, Harwick's body began to change again, dissolving into a viscous black substance that slid obscenely from the sword. The liquid pooled on the floor, then shot across the room toward Diana. "No!" Eleanor cried, realizing Harwick's intent too late. The dark substance enveloped Diana, who screamed once before her body began to transform, growing larger, more bestial, her beautiful face elongating into a grotesque parody of a wolf's muzzle. Her fine dress ripped as her body expanded, dark fur erupting from her skin. "Two bodies!" The creature that had been Diana and Harwick rasped, its voice a horrifying blend of both. "One will. And now the strength of your precious stepmother to add to my own." Alexander stepped protectively in front of Eleanor again, but she moved to his side instead, placing her hand on his wounded arm. Through their bond, she channeled her energy into him, accelerating his natural healing. "We face this together," she said quietly. The Harwick-Diana creature circled them, its movements unnaturally fluid for something so large. "How touching," it mocked, the cripple and the orphan united in their final moments. "You talk too much," Alexander replied flatly, then lunged forward with renewed strength, his sword tracing a silver arc through the air. The creature dodged with surprising speed, then countered with a swipe of massive claws that Alexander barely avoided. Eleanor concentrated, sending silent commands to her animal allies. The wolves responded instantly, rushing the monster from behind, while falcons dive-bombed its eyes. Howling in frustration, the creature batted away the smaller animals, but the distraction allowed Alexander to score another hit, his blade slicing deep into the monster's flank. Black ichor spurted from the wound, hissing where it touched the stone floor. Eleanor reached again for her pouch of silver powder, but the creature was learning, keeping its distance from her while focusing its attacks on Alexander. Through their bond, she felt his growing fatigue, the strain of combat on his injured leg. "We need to end this quickly," she thought, knowing he could sense her concern. A plan formed in her mind, dangerous but potentially decisive. Alexander caught her intention through their connection and gave an almost imperceptible nod of agreement. Moving with deliberate vulnerability, he allowed his stance to waver, presenting the appearance of exhaustion. The creature took the bait, charging forward for what it believed would be a killing blow. At the last possible moment, Alexander dropped to one knee, his sword braced against the floor, point upward. The creature, unable to check its momentum, impaled itself on the blade. Simultaneously, Eleanor threw the last of Gabriel's powder directly into the monster's gaping maw. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The creature convulsed violently, black ichor pouring from every orifice. It thrashed and howled, its form shifting rapidly between human and beast as the silver powder worked its purifying magic against the corruption within. "This isn't the end," it gasped, its voice now purely Harwick's as Diana's essence dissolved under the assault. "My masters will send others. The forest will fall. The old ways will die." "Not while I live," Eleanor replied steadily. "Not while the forest speaker walks these lands." With a final inhuman scream, the creature collapsed, its form dissolving into black sludge that steamed and evaporated until nothing remained but a dark stain on the throne room floor. The silence that followed felt absolute. Alexander rose slowly, his sword arm dropping in exhaustion. Eleanor moved to his side, supporting him as they surveyed the aftermath of battle. The animals that had answered her call began to withdraw, melting back into passages and windows, returning to the forest that was their home. "It's over?" Alexander asked, his voice rough with fatigue. "Harwick is destroyed," Eleanor confirmed, reaching out with her senses to confirm no trace of his corrupted presence remained. But he spoke the truth about one thing. Whatever dark power he served will likely send others. Alexander nodded grimly. "Then we must be ready." He turned to face her fully, his storm-gray eyes searching hers. "We must unite our kingdoms in truth, not just through marriage." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. The northern strength and eastern wisdom combined as our ancestors intended. She glanced at the stain where Harwick had fallen. But first, we have wounded to tend and a fortress to secure. Gabriel emerged from a hidden passage, looking remarkably unruffled despite the chaos that had engulfed the throne room. I've already sent healers to assist the injured. Morgan lives, though her wounds are serious. And the western tunnel? Alexander asked. Sealed on my authority, Gabriel replied, though we lost many good warriors defending it. Eleanor felt the weight of those losses, understanding for the first time the true burden of rule. These people had died protecting her, protecting what she represented. We will honor them, she said quietly, and ensure their sacrifice was not in vain. Alexander's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. Through their bond, she felt his pride, his concern, and something deeper growing. Not quite love yet, but the foundation for it. Come, he said. There is someone you should meet before we address what remains of Harwick's forces. Curious, Eleanor followed as Alexander led her through the fortress, moving deeper into the mountain once more, but taking a different path than their earlier journey to the Chamber of Echoes. They descended a spiral staircase, passed through corridors lit by strange crystals rather than torches, and finally arrived at a simple wooden door, reinforced with iron bands. Alexander withdrew a key from around his neck. William asked that I bring you here when the time was right, he said, unlocking the door. I believe that time has come. The room beyond was small, Spartanly furnished with a bed, table, and chair. Books lined one wall, herbs and strange implements another. And sitting in a chair by a small window cut into the rock, gazing at the stars visible through the narrow opening, was a man Eleanor recognized instantly, despite the changes time had wrought. Father? She whispered, hardly daring to believe her eyes. William Silverheart turned, his weathered face lighting with joy. Eleanor, he breathed, rising from his chair with effort, his body showing signs of old injuries. My brave girl. Eleanor rushed forward, enfolding him in an embrace that conveyed everything words could not. Grief, relief, confusion, joy. But how? She asked when she could finally speak. Alexander said you were mortally wounded. I was, William confirmed, his hand rising to touch a terrible scar visible at his throat. By all rights, I should have died, but Gabriel's healing arts and your betrothed's stubborn refusal to let me perish prevailed. Eleanor turned to Alexander, who remained by the door, allowing them this reunion. You never told me. William asked that I keep his survival secret until Harwick was defeated, Alexander explained, to protect both of you. If Harwick had known William lived, he would have redoubled his efforts to find you. William took Eleanor's hands in his, studying her with eyes full of pride. Look at you, he said softly. Every inch your father's daughter, your true father's, he clarified, though I hope I played some small part in shaping the woman you've become. The largest part, Eleanor insisted fiercely. James may have given me life, but you, William Silverheart, taught me how to live it. She touched the wooden amulet, now restored to its place around her neck. You protected me, loved me, prepared me for this moment, knowing it would mean losing me to my destiny. William smiled, though his eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Not losing you, sharing you with the world you were born to lead. He glanced past her to Alexander, and with the man fated to stand beside you. Alexander stepped forward then, joining them. William has agreed to serve as royal advisor to both northern and eastern courts, he said. His knowledge of both territories is unmatched, as is his loyalty. Eleanor felt the pieces of her fractured world beginning to align. William alive, her heritage revealed, her powers awakened, and Alexander beside her, their souls linked through ancient magic, their kingdoms poised for reunification. Yet questions remained. My true father, she said to William. What became of James? Gabriel and Alexander spoke as though his fate was unknown. William's expression grew solemn. When Harwick's betrayal came, James fought valiantly to protect your mother and you. I managed to take you to safety as he commanded, but he was gravely wounded in the battle. I saw him fall. But no body was ever found, Alexander added. After Harwick's forces retreated with what they believed was total victory, search parties found many dead, but not the king. Some believe he escaped into the eastern forests, William continued. Others think Harwick took his body as a trophy. I searched for years whenever I could do so safely, but found no trace. Eleanor absorbed this information, another mystery to unravel in time. But for now, there were more pressing concerns. Harwick's forces still surround the fortress, she reminded them. Leaderless now, but dangerous. And the corruption he spoke of, Alexander added grimly. Whatever dark power granted him that unnatural form will not be pleased to lose its agent. One battle at a time, William advised, the strategist in him emerging. First, we secure Blackthorn and send Harwick's army fleeing. Then we journey to the eastern capital to reclaim your throne there, Eleanor. The eastern people have lived under regents loyal to Harwick for too long. And then? Eleanor asked, looking between the two men who had shaped her destiny in such different ways. Alexander's hand found hers once more, the contact sending warmth through their primal bond. Then we begin the work our ancestors envisioned 5 centuries ago, the reunification of the bloodlines, the restoration of balance. The awakening of the old ways, William added with satisfaction. Eleanor nodded, feeling the rightness of this path unfolding before her. Through the fortress walls, she sensed the forest creatures still waiting, ready to serve their speaker. Through her bond with Alexander, she felt his unwavering support and growing affection. And within herself, she felt the stirring of something ancient and powerful, a legacy that had waited 20 years to be claimed. The forest speaker had awakened, and the world would never be the same. Dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of amber and gold as Eleanor stood atop the highest tower of Blackthorn Citadel. From this vantage point, she could see for miles the dark pines of the surrounding forest, the distant mountains that marked the border with the Eastern Kingdom, and the remnants of Harwick's forces retreating into the wilderness, their courage shattered by the events of the previous night. The wind carried their scents to her enhanced senses, fear, confusion, and beneath it all, the lingering taint of the dark corruption that had fueled their former master. Most were simply hired mercenaries who had no true loyalty to Harwick's cause, merely to his coin. Without his leadership, they had quickly dissolved into disorganized bands, easy prey for the forest predators that Eleanor had commanded to harry their retreat without killing. "The scouts report they've crossed the southern ridge," Alexander said, joining her at the parapet. His wounded arm was bandaged beneath his simple tunic, but through their bond, Eleanor could feel it healing at a remarkable rate. They scatter in all directions, telling wild tales of forest spirits and a witch queen who commands the beasts. A smile touched Eleanor's lips. Let them spread those stories. Fear will accomplish what armies cannot. Alexander studied her profile, still marveling at the subtle changes the awakening of her power had wrought. Her pale blonde hair seemed to capture more light now, almost glowing in the morning sun. Her eyes, once simply gray, now shifted with flecks of silver and amber depending on her mood. She stood straighter, moved with more fluid grace, and carried herself with the unconscious authority of one who knows her true place in the world. "How do you feel?" he asked, genuinely curious. Through their primal bond, he sensed a complex mixture of emotions beneath her calm exterior. "Changed," she replied, after a moment's consideration, "as though I've lived my entire life viewing the world through clouded glass, and now see it clearly for the first time." She extended her hand, palm up, and a raven descended from nowhere to perch on her fingers. It cocked its head, regarding her with intelligent eyes. "The forest speaks to me constantly now. Every creature, every tree, every stone with memory. It's overwhelming and comforting in equal measure." The raven croaked softly, then took flight again, circling once before heading eastward. "And our bond?" Alexander asked, his voice carefully neutral, despite the flutter of vulnerability Eleanor sensed through their connection. She turned to face him fully, studying the man who was now her husband in every sense that mattered. The rising sun highlighted the silver streaks at his temples, the network of old scars that spoke of battles fought and survived, the lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. Not conventionally handsome, perhaps, but powerful, steadfast, and increasingly dear to her. "Our bond grounds me," she said simply. "When the voices of the forest grow too numerous, I can focus on your presence, solid as the mountain beneath us." Something eased in Alexander's posture, a tension he hadn't been fully aware of carrying. "I'm glad," he said. "I feared the primal ceremony might have been too much, too soon." Eleanor shook her head. It was necessary, and right. She hesitated, then added softly, I'm beginning to think that everything that led us to this moment was necessary, even the pain. Alexander's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. There will be more challenges ahead. The Eastern Kingdom has been under Harwick's influence for 20 years. Reclaiming your birthright won't be simple. I know, she acknowledged. But first, we must ensure Blackthorn is secure. Your people have suffered losses defending a queen they barely know. Alexander's expression softened with pride. A queen who thinks of her subjects' needs before her own. My people recognize your worth, Eleanor. The stories of how you called the forest to our defense spread through the fortress overnight. They call you the Wolf Queen now. A wry smile curved her lips. Just yesterday I was a forester's daughter. Now I collect titles like other women gather flowers. Forest Speaker, Wolf Queen. Alexander's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. But most importantly, Eleanor Silvermoon Blackthorn, true heir to the Eastern Crown and Queen of the North. The weight of those identities pressed upon her, but not unpleasantly. Rather, like a mantle settling onto shoulders made to bear it. We should join the others, she said. Gabriel and William will be waiting with the council. They descended the tower's spiral staircase together, moving through corridors that buzzed with activity as the fortress returned to normal operation after the night's battle. Servants bowed deeply as they passed, their expressions a mixture of awe and curiosity when they glanced at Eleanor. Guards snapped to attention, fists pressed to hearts in the traditional Blackthorn salute. The small council chamber was located near the heart of the mountain, its walls lined with maps and ancient tomes. A round table of polished black stone dominated the center, carved from a single massive boulder, legend said, by the first Blackthorn king. Around it sat the kingdom's most trusted advisors, Gabriel, his weathered face thoughtful, William, still pale from his long convalescence but clear-eyed and alert, Morgan, her left arm in a sling but otherwise recovered from defending the western tunnel, Terence, the spymaster, his quick eyes missing nothing, and several others Eleanor was still coming to know. All rose as Alexander and Eleanor entered, not resuming their seats until the royal couple had taken their places at the table. The remnants of Harwick's army pose no immediate threat, Alexander began without preamble. But the danger he represented hasn't ended with his death. We must prepare for what comes next. The dark power he served will send others, Gabriel agreed grimly. The corruption that flowed through his veins was unlike anything I've encountered in all my years as keeper of the old knowledge. Before we address external threats, William interjected, his ranger's practicality asserting itself, we should consider our immediate needs. The fortress sustained damage, particularly the western defenses. We lost 23 warriors, with another 17 seriously wounded. Alexander nodded. Repairs are already underway. Morgan, what of our military strength? The warrior woman straightened, ignoring the pain Eleanor sensed radiating from her injured shoulder. We maintain 500 fighting men and women within the citadel, with another 300 distributed among the outlying settlements. 80% are combat ready, the rest either injured or assigned to essential duties. A formidable force, Alexander acknowledged, but spread thin across our territories. And now we must consider the Eastern Kingdom as well. All eyes turned to Eleanor. Through their bond, Alexander encouraged her to speak, to establish her authority with this council that would now serve two rulers. The Eastern Kingdom has been without its rightful ruler for 20 years, she said, her voice steady, despite her inner uncertainty. Harwick ruled through puppet regents, loyal only to him. With his death, a power vacuum exists that we must fill before others attempt to do so. You'll face challenges to your claim, Terence warned. Many believe the entire royal line was extinguished. Some who know better may prefer to maintain that fiction for their own gain. Which is why we must move quickly, William added. Strike while Harwick's loyalists are still reeling from his death. Gabriel unrolled an ancient map across the table's surface, its parchment yellowed with age, but its details still clear. The eastern capital of Silver Meadow lies 3 days' ride from here, following the old forest road. In the ancient days before the Sundering, it was considered the heart of the United Kingdoms. Eleanor studied the map, memories stirring that weren't entirely her own. Knowledge of the land passed through blood and bone, awakened by the moonstone ring that now never left her finger. The royal palace stands upon the Silver Falls, she said, her finger tracing the location with unerring accuracy, despite never having seen this map before. Built so that the royal chambers extend partially over the waterfall itself, The throne room faces east to catch the first light of dawn through windows of crystal and silver. Gabriel's bushy eyebrows rose. The blood remembers, he murmured appreciatively. We should depart tomorrow, Alexander decided, a small force moving swiftly. The longer we delay, the more time Harwick's remaining allies have to organize resistance. Who will govern Blackthorn in your absence? Morgan asked. You will, Alexander replied without hesitation. With Gabriel to advise you. The people trust you both, and you know the land's defenses better than anyone. Morgan inclined her head, accepting the responsibility. And what force do you propose to take east? 50 of our best, Alexander said after brief consideration. Elite fighters, scouts, and those with knowledge of the eastern territories, plus whatever assistance Eleanor's forest allies can provide. Eleanor nodded. The animals that had answered her call during the battle had mostly returned to their territories, but she maintained a constant awareness of them, like distant stars in her consciousness. The wolves will accompany us, she confirmed, and the birds will scout our path. There's something else to consider, William said, his expression troubled. If what Gabriel suspects is true, that Harwick served some darker power beyond our understanding, then there may be other agents beyond the eastern borders. The southern kingdom has always been suspicious of the old ways. They might see the reunification of north and east as a threat. And the western kingdom remains isolated but watchful, Gabriel added. They maintain the old knowledge but have chosen neutrality for generations. Whether they would welcome the return of the forest speaker is uncertain. Alexander's hand came to rest on the hilt of his sword, a habitual gesture when he contemplated conflict. We cannot fight enemies on all sides. We must secure the east first, then seek allies where we can find them. There is another possibility, Eleanor said quietly, an idea taking shape in her mind, one that doesn't involve fighting at all. All eyes turned to her again, curious. The animals of the forest recognize no borders, she explained. They move freely between all territories. Through them, I can gather information, send messages, perhaps even find those in other kingdoms who still honor the old ways in secret. Spies that cannot be caught or questioned, Terence said with professional admiration. Brilliant. More than that, Eleanor continued, warming to her idea. The primal bond Alexander and I share. It's powerful, but Gabriel has hinted that it's only one of the old magics that might be reawakened. What if there are others in the West, even in the South, who maintain connections to the ancient ways? We could reach out to them, build alliances based on the shared heritage that existed before the Sundering. A spark of hope kindled in the room, reflected in the faces around the table. The return of the forest speaker after all these years could indeed be seen as a sign, Gabriel mused. There are prophecies, old ones, speaking of a time when the separated bloodlines would reunite, when the balance would be restored. Then it's settled, Alexander concluded. We ride for Silver Meadow tomorrow at first light. Morgan and Gabriel will maintain Blackthorn's defenses. Terence will establish contact with his existing agents in the east to prepare for our arrival. And Eleanor, he glanced at his queen with unmistakable pride, will begin reaching out through the forest to find potential allies beyond our borders. As the council continued discussing practical details, Eleanor's awareness drifted outward, touching the consciousness of animals throughout the surrounding lands. A fox slipping through underbrush near the southern border, an eagle soaring above the western peaks, a family of bears fishing in a northern stream, and somewhere far to the east, something else, a presence both familiar and strange, like an echo of her own awakened power. Her attention snapped back to the council chamber when Alexander gently touched her arm. "Eleanor?" he questioned. "You sense something?" She hesitated, not yet wanting to voice the half-formed impression. "Perhaps. I'll need time to explore it further." The council meeting concluded with assignments distributed and plans set in motion. As the advisors filed out, William lingered, waiting until he was alone with Eleanor and Alexander. "There's something else you should have before you depart for Silver Meadow," he said, reaching into his tunic to withdraw a small leather pouch. "I've carried this since the night I fled the Eastern Palace with you, Eleanor. It was your mother's final gift to you." With reverent care, he tipped the pouch's contents into Eleanor's palm. A delicate silver locket in the shape of a crescent moon, inlaid with tiny opals that caught the light like captured stars. "Queen Aurora placed this around your neck the day you were born," William explained softly. When I took you from the palace during Harwick's attack, I removed it, fearing it would identify you too easily. I've kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right moment to return it to you." Eleanor traced the locket's intricate engravings with trembling fingers. "My mother," she whispered. "I have no memory of her." "She was extraordinary," William said, his voice thick with old grief. "Kind but formidable. She had the strongest connection to the forest magic of any Eastern royal in generations. It was from her bloodline that the forest speaker's gift flowed most purely." "Does it open?" Alexander asked gently. William nodded. "There's a small catch on the side." Eleanor found it and pressed carefully. The locket's two halves parted to reveal miniature portraits. On one side, a handsome man with Eleanor's pale blonde hair and determined eyes, James Silvermoon, her birth father. On the opposite side, a beautiful woman with auburn hair and a serene expression, her eyes the same shifting silver gray that Eleanor now saw in her own reflection. "She's beautiful," Eleanor breathed. "She would be proud of the woman you've become," William said with certainty. "As am I." Eleanor closed the locket and slipped the chain over her head, feeling the silver warm against her skin as it settled beside the wooden wolf amulet. Two symbols of her dual heritage, one crafted with royal artistry, the other with a foster father's love. "Thank you for keeping this safe," she said, embracing William tightly. "For keeping me safe." The old ranger returned her embrace, then straightened with visible effort. "Now you should both rest while you can. The journey to Silver Meadow will test your strength, and you'll need clear heads when you arrive." After William departed, Alexander and Eleanor retreated to their private chambers to prepare for the journey ahead. Servants had laid out traveling clothes, lightweight armor, and provisions. Maps of the eastern territories were spread across a large table, marked with potential routes and danger points. As Eleanor studied the maps, Alexander came to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Are you afraid?" he asked, the private question markedly different from his confident demeanor in the council chamber. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. "Not afraid exactly," she replied, "but aware of how much I still don't know. About my heritage, about these powers awakening inside me, about the challenges waiting in the East." She turned to face him. "What about you? You're risking your kingdom, your life, for a claim that many will dispute." Alexander's storm-gray eyes held steady on hers. "I've risked both for lesser causes," he said simply. "The reunification of our kingdoms isn't just about your birthright, Eleanor. It's about restoring balance to lands that have been fractured for too long." Through their bond, she sensed the absolute conviction behind his words, and something more, a growing warmth whenever he looked at her that transcended political alliance or even the primal ceremony that had joined their souls. "Then we face whatever comes together," she said, reaching up to trace the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. The Wolf King and his forest speaker. His hand captured hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. "My queen," he murmured, and then his lips found hers in a kiss far different from the ceremonial one they had shared beneath the sacred pool. This one spoke of choice rather than duty, of desire rather than necessity. When they parted, something had shifted between them, deepening their connection beyond the magical bond they already shared. Eleanor sensed Alexander's surprise and pleasure at the development, matching her own. "Rest," he said reluctantly, stepping back. "Tomorrow's journey begins early, and the path ahead won't be easy." Eleanor nodded, though rest seemed unlikely with her mind and heart racing in new directions. As Alexander departed to make final preparations with his guards, she moved to the windows of their chamber, gazing eastward toward the kingdom she had never known yet was born to rule. The journey to Silver Meadow began in pre-dawn darkness, their company of 50 elite warriors moving silently through the fortress gates. Alexander rode at the head of the column, his massive black stallion fresh and eager after days confined within the citadel walls. Eleanor rode beside him on a dapple gray mare, chosen specifically for endurance and sure-footedness on forest trails. As they entered the dense pines that marked the beginning of the old forest road, Eleanor sensed rather than saw their additional escorts, a pack of wolves moving parallel to their path, silent shadows among the trees. Above, ravens and hawks circled, their keen eyes surveying the land ahead for any sign of danger. The forest road itself was ancient, predating even the Sundering according to Gabriel's histories. Built of fitted stone now mostly covered with moss and fallen needles, it wound through the wilderness following the natural contours of the land. In places, carved pillars marked distances or significant locations, their surfaces weathered beyond legibility to normal eyes. But Eleanor found she could trace the faded symbols with her fingertips and understand their meanings, another gift of her awakened heritage. "This one marks a sacred spring, 300 paces to the north," she told Alexander, as they paused beside a particularly ornate pillar around midday. The waters were believed to have healing properties, especially for ailments of the blood. Alexander studied her with fascination. "You've never traveled this road before, yet you read these markers as easily as if you'd carved them yourself." "The knowledge comes to me like half-remembered dreams," she explained, "as though I learned these things long ago and am only now recalling them." Their first day's travel passed without incident, the company making good time along the ancient road. They camped that night in a sheltered hollow, posting guards in rotation, though Eleanor assured them her animal sentinels would warn of any approach. As the warriors settled around small, carefully banked fires, William joined Eleanor and Alexander at their private campsite, bringing a roughly drawn map showing greater detail of the immediate territories than the ancient ones they'd studied at Blackthorn. "We'll reach the border of the Eastern Kingdom by midday tomorrow," he explained, pointing to a river marked in blue ink. "The Silver River forms the traditional boundary. There's an old bridge here, and a guard post that was still maintained in my day, though who controls it now is uncertain." "Your forest friends detect any movement ahead?" Alexander asked Eleanor. She closed her eyes briefly, extending her awareness through the network of animal minds that surrounded them. "There's activity at the bridge," she confirmed. "Men in armor, 6, perhaps 7. They maintain a watch post, though it seems perfunctory. They're not expecting trouble." William nodded. "Harwick's men, most likely, or those loyal to whoever he installed to govern in his absence. They won't recognize Eleanor, of course, but a company of Blackthorn warriors will certainly raise alarm." "We could bypass the bridge entirely," Alexander suggested. "Find another crossing point." "No," Eleanor said with sudden certainty. "We should approach openly. These are my people, even if they don't know it yet. I won't skulk into my own kingdom like a thief." Alexander studied her with approval. "What do you propose?" "A small advance party," she decided. "Myself, you, William, and perhaps 2 others. We approach under a banner of peace, requesting passage to Silver Meadow on diplomatic business. The rest of our force can remain hidden, but close enough to intervene if necessary." "It's risky," William cautioned. "If they recognize me or suspect your identity—" "They won't," Eleanor assured him. "Not yet. The forest will shield our true numbers, and my appearance has changed enough since my awakening that none who knew me as a forester's daughter would immediately connect me to that life." After further discussion, they agreed on the plan. Eleanor spent the remainder of the evening communing with the forest creatures, establishing a network of sentinels that would provide warning of any threat. Alexander drilled quietly with his personal guard, selecting the 2 warriors who would accompany them to the bridge, both veterans of many campaigns, skilled in both diplomacy and combat. As night deepened, Eleanor found herself restless, her enhanced senses making true sleep difficult amid the chorus of forest life. She slipped away from the camp, moving silently through the trees until she found a small clearing bathed in moonlight. There, she practiced the skills Gabriel had begun teaching her, extending her consciousness into the forest, not just to communicate with animals, but to sense the deeper currents of life that flowed through all living things. The trees themselves had awareness of a sort, ancient and slow, but Eleanor found she could touch their consciousness if she stilled her own enough to match their rhythm. She was so deeply immersed in this communion that she didn't hear Alexander approach until he was nearly beside her. "The guards were concerned when they couldn't find you," he said softly, careful not to startle her. Eleanor opened her eyes, returning fully to her body. "I'm sorry. I needed to practice. Everything Gabriel has taught me feels like merely scratching the surface of what's possible." Alexander settled beside her on the moss-covered ground, his larger frame moving with surprising grace. "What do you sense?" "Life," she said simply. "Everywhere, in endless variations. The trees remember things we've long forgotten. They whisper of ages when the world was different, when magic flowed more freely through all things." "Can they help us?" Alexander asked practically. "These ancient memories?" Eleanor smiled at his warrior's mind, always seeking tactical advantage. Perhaps. They know the paths that once existed, before roads were built or kingdoms divided. They remember where power once gathered and might gather again. She hesitated. And they whisper of threats, too, dark things stirring in distant places. Alexander's expression sobered. Harwick's masters? Maybe. It's difficult to interpret. Tree thoughts aren't like ours. They perceive time and danger differently. She shivered slightly, though the night was mild. But they fear something. Something that consumes rather than nurtures. Something that takes without giving back. Alexander's arm encircled her shoulders, offering wordless comfort. They sat together in the moonlit clearing, the ancient trees standing sentinel around them, until Eleanor's unease subsided. "We should return to camp," she said eventually. "Tomorrow will test us both." The morning dawned clear and bright, the forest alive with birdsong. The company broke camp efficiently, following Eleanor and Alexander's orders to prepare for the approach to the border bridge. Most of the warriors would remain concealed in the forest, while the small diplomatic party would continue openly down the road. As they neared the Silver River around midday, Eleanor felt a subtle change in the land itself. The trees here were different, more silver birch among the pines, the undergrowth lusher, the air carrying the sweet scent of meadow flowers even in the heart of the forest. "We've crossed into Eastern territory," William confirmed, noticing her reaction. "The boundary isn't just political. The land itself changes character." Eleanor nodded, feeling an inexplicable sense of homecoming, though she had no conscious memory of this place. The wooden amulet and silver locket both seemed warmer against her skin, responding to her heritage and the land's recognition of its rightful ruler. The bridge came into view as they rounded a bend in the forest road. It was an elegant structure of pale stone, arching gracefully over the rushing waters of the Silver River. On the far side stood a small outpost, flying a banner Eleanor didn't recognize. Dark green with a silver falcon, not the traditional crest of the Eastern Kingdom. "Harwick's personal standard," William murmured. "He replaced the royal silver wolf with his own symbol after he seized power." Guards in green leather armor stood at attention on the bridge, watching their approach with professional wariness. As planned, Alexander rode slightly ahead, the diplomatic banner of Blackthorn, white with the silver wolf, held aloft by one of the warriors accompanying them. The captain of the guard stepped forward as they reached the bridge, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. "Halt and identify yourselves," he called. Alexander reined in his stallion, maintaining the posture of a diplomatic envoy rather than a king. "Travelers from Blackthorn seeking passage to Silver Meadow on urgent business." The captain's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Blackthorn rarely sends envoys east. What business brings you now?" "News regarding Lord Harwick," Alexander replied carefully, "for the regent's ears only." At the mention of Harwick's name, a ripple of tension passed through the guards. Eleanor, watching closely, noted their reactions with interest. Not grief or outrage at potential news of their lord's demise, but nervousness, even fear. "Lord Harwick has not returned from his northern expedition," the captain said stiffly. "The regent awaits his arrival daily." "So they don't yet know of his death," Eleanor realized. This could work to their advantage. "Then our news is all the more urgent," Alexander pressed. "Will you grant us passage, or must we return to King Alexander with word that Eastern hospitality has diminished in recent years?" The veiled threat, mentioning Alexander's name and implying diplomatic consequences, had its intended effect. The captain hesitated, then stepped aside with visible reluctance. "You may pass," he said, "but I must send a rider ahead to alert the regent of your approach, and your weapons remain peacebound until you reach Silver Meadow." Alexander inclined his head in agreement, and their small party proceeded across the bridge, fastening their weapons with leather straps to signify they would not be drawn without cause, a traditional gesture of peaceful intent when entering another's territory. As they crossed the midpoint of the bridge, Eleanor felt a surge of connection to the land around her. The rushing water below seemed to sing a welcome, the trees on the eastern bank swayed despite the still air, and somewhere nearby, a wolf howled a greeting that made the guards shift nervously. "The land knows its queen has returned," William whispered, riding close beside her. "Even after 20 years, it remembers." They continued eastward, aware that the captain had indeed dispatched a rider racing ahead toward Silver Meadow. The forest road widened as they traveled, signs of civilization growing more frequent. Small farming settlements appeared, their inhabitants pausing in their work to stare curiously at the strangers passing through. Eleanor studied these people, her people, noting their lean builds, their quiet dignity despite obvious poverty, the subtle ways some of them seemed to sense something unusual about her presence. "Harwick's rule has not been kind to them," William observed grimly. "These same villages were prosperous when James and Aurora ruled." "They will be again," Eleanor vowed softly. By late afternoon, they crested a hill and beheld Silver Meadow spread before them in the valley below. The city was built around a vast central meadow, now more brown than silver in the late summer heat, with the royal palace rising at its eastern edge where the Silver River plunged over a cliff in spectacular falls. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see that parts of the palace showed signs of neglect, its once gleaming silver spires now dull against the sky. "Home," William said, his voice thick with emotion, though changed from when I last saw it. Eleanor felt a complex surge of emotions, wonder at finally beholding her birthplace, determination to restore its former beauty, and beneath it all, a growing certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. The moonstone ring pulsed with warmth on her finger, responding to its proximity to the seat of Eastern power. As they descended toward the city gates, Eleanor reached out with her forest awareness, connecting with the birds that soared above Silver Meadow, the small creatures that inhabited its gardens and parks, even the horses in its stables. Through their senses, she built a composite picture of the city's current state. Guards patrolling in numbers that suggested unease rather than security, common folk going about their business with the careful movements of those who wish to avoid notice, and at the palace itself, signs of hasty preparation, servants rushing, guards reinforcing positions. "They're preparing for our arrival," she told Alexander. "The regent has been alerted and seems agitated." "Good," Alexander replied with grim satisfaction. "Off-balance opponents make mistakes." Their approach to the city gates drew considerable attention. Common folk stopped to stare at the small but impressive party bearing the banner of Blackthorn. Guards straightened to attention, their expressions betraying uncertainty about how to receive these unexpected visitors. The gates themselves stood open, as was customary during daylight hours, but a delegation awaited them just inside, a nervous-looking official in the green and silver of Harwick's administration, flanked by a dozen armed guards. "Welcome, envoys of Blackthorn," the official greeted them with forced courtesy. "I am Chancellor Perot, voice of the regent. You are expected at the palace." "We are honored by such a reception," Alexander replied smoothly. "I am Lord Alexander Blackcrest, personal envoy of King Alexander." The false name was part of their strategy, allowing Alexander to move through the city without immediately revealing his true identity. Eleanor sat straight on her mount, outwardly calm, though her heart raced beneath the fine traveling cloak that concealed her royal pendants. They had agreed she would adopt the role of Alexander's advisor, introduced simply as Lady Eleanor, to allow her to observe and assess without drawing undue attention. Chancellor Perot's gaze lingered on her curiously before returning to Alexander. "Your message mentioned urgent news regarding Lord Harwick. The regent is most eager to hear it." "As we are eager to deliver it," Alexander assured him, "though the journey has been long and we would appreciate a moment to refresh ourselves before the formal audience." The Chancellor hesitated, clearly torn between his instructions to bring them directly to the palace and the dictates of basic hospitality. "Of course," he conceded finally. "Quarters have been prepared for you at the palace. Please follow me." Their small party proceeded through Silver Meadow's main thoroughfare, Eleanor absorbing every detail of her birthplace. The city retained an elegant bone structure beneath its current neglect, wide avenues lined with silver birch trees, graceful fountains in small squares, and buildings constructed of the same pale stone as the border bridge, many adorned with intricate carvings of forest scenes. But signs of Harwick's oppressive rule were equally evident. The royal crest of the silver wolf had been removed from public buildings, replaced with the silver falcon. Guards seemed numerous for a city at peace, watching citizens with suspicious eyes. And the people themselves moved with the careful reserve of those accustomed to being overheard and reported upon. The palace grounds came into view as they followed a tree-lined avenue to the city's eastern edge. Despite its partial disrepair, the royal residence remained magnificent. A sprawling complex of pale stone buildings with silver-tiled roofs and tall spires that caught the late afternoon sun. The rushing sound of the silver falls provided a constant backdrop, the massive waterfall visible beyond the palace's eastern wing. As they entered the outer courtyard, servants appeared to take their horses and guide them to their assigned quarters. Eleanor maintained her role as advisor, saying little but observing everything: the positioning of guards, the whispered conversations among servants, the subtle signs of a household preparing for potential conflict. Through her connection with the forest creatures, she maintained awareness of their blackthorn forces concealed in the woods beyond the city. Alexander had given orders for them to approach after nightfall, establishing hidden positions from which they could respond if the diplomatic mission went awry. The quarters assigned to them were in the palace's western wing, comfortable but strategically positioned, far from both the regent's chambers and any easy escape routes, Eleanor noted. Windows overlooked an ornamental garden that had clearly seen better days, its fountains dry and flower beds overgrown. Once the servants had departed, leaving them to refresh themselves before the evening audience, Alexander secured the door and turned to Eleanor and William. "Initial impressions?" he asked quietly. "They don't yet know of Harwick's death," William replied, "but they're suspicious of our arrival. The Chancellor's nervousness suggests he fears bearing bad news to his master." "The Regent," Eleanor mused. "Do we know who currently holds that position?" William's expression darkened. "If tradition held, it would be Lord Bastian, Harwick's cousin and closest ally in the coup 20 years ago. A cruel man with none of Harwick's intelligence but twice his brutality." "The city is tense," Eleanor added. "I sense fear everywhere, in the people, in the servants, even in the guards. Whatever rule Harwick established through Bastian, it relies on intimidation rather than loyalty." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "That works to our advantage. Fear-based loyalty crumbles quickly when the object of fear is removed." He moved to the window, gazing out at the neglected garden. "Our forces will be in position by midnight. We proceed as planned. Attend this audience, gauge the regent's reaction to news of Harwick's death, then decide whether to reveal your identity immediately or wait until our position is stronger." Eleanor joined him at the window, her enhanced senses detecting movement in the garden below, not human guards but small creatures watching the palace on her behalf. "The animals tell me there are passages beneath the palace," she said quietly, "old ones, forgotten by most. They may prove useful if we need an alternative exit." "The ancient ways," William confirmed, "built during the time before the Sundering. I know of some, though not all. They were royal secrets, passed from monarch to monarch." "My blood remembers them," Eleanor said with quiet certainty. "If needed, I can find them." Their strategy discussion continued as they prepared for the audience, changing from travel clothes into attire more befitting a diplomatic envoy. For Eleanor, this meant a gown of forest green with silver embroidery, her pale blonde hair arranged simply but elegantly, the wooden amulet and silver locket hidden beneath her bodice but still against her skin. Alexander donned formal black with the silver wolf of Blackthorn emblazoned subtly on his collar, not the full regalia of a king, but clothing that could quickly be recognized as royal if their disguise needed to be abandoned. As dusk fell, a servant arrived to escort them to the great hall. They followed him through corridors that should have felt foreign to Eleanor yet somehow didn't. Her feet seemed to know these pathways, her eyes recognizing turns and doorways she had never consciously seen before. "The blood remembers," Gabriel had said. Now she understood what he meant. The great hall of Silver Meadow Palace stretched before them as the massive doors swung open. A vast chamber with soaring ceilings supported by columns carved to resemble silver birch trees. At its far end stood a dais upon which rested two thrones, one occupied, one conspicuously empty. The occupied throne held a corpulent man with a florid face and small, calculating eyes. Lord Bastian, Eleanor presumed, noting the cruel set of his mouth and the way his fingers restlessly tapped the throne's armrest. He wore robes of dark green trimmed with silver, and upon his head sat a circlet that was decidedly not the true crown of the Eastern Kingdom. "The envoys of Blackthorn," announced the chamberlain as they proceeded down the long central aisle. Eleanor felt the weight of many eyes upon them. The regents, his assembled courtiers, the guards positioned strategically throughout the hall. Through her forest connection, she sensed the small creatures that had found their way into the palace, hidden in walls and rafters, providing her with multiple perspectives on the scene unfolding around them. They halted at the appropriate distance from the dais, Alexander performing a formal bow of exactly the right depth for an envoy addressing a regent, respectful but not subservient. Eleanor and William followed suit. "Rise," Bastian commanded, his voice unexpectedly high for his bulk. "Lord Alexander Blackcrest, is it? An unusual name for a Blackthorn envoy." "These are unusual times, my Lord Regent," Alexander replied smoothly, "which is why my king has sent me with urgent tidings." Bastian leaned forward slightly, his small eyes narrowing further. "Regarding Lord Harwick, your message said, 'I await his return daily.' You have news of his whereabouts?" Alexander's expression revealed nothing as he delivered the news they had carefully crafted. "Lord Harwick will not be returning to Silver Meadow, my lord. He met his end in Blackthorn 3 nights past." A murmur ran through the assembled courtiers. Bastian's face flushed darker, his knuckles whitening where they gripped the throne's armrests. "What treachery is this?" he demanded. "Harwick went north to negotiate, not to be murdered by Blackthorn dogs." "Not murder, my lord," Alexander corrected calmly. "Lord Harwick attacked our fortress without provocation, leading an army against our gates while driving innocent villagers before him as shields. He died in combat, as a warrior might expect when assaulting a defended stronghold." Bastian rose to his feet, trembling with rage or fear, perhaps both. "Lies! Why would Lord Harwick attack Blackthorn when he journeyed simply to reclaim stolen property?" His gaze swept the hall before returning to Alexander. "Where is the girl he sought? The thief who took what was rightfully his?" Eleanor felt a surge of indignation at being referred to as property, but maintained her composed expression, watching Bastian carefully. The regent's reaction confirmed their suspicions. Harwick had shared at least some of his plans with his cousin, though perhaps not the full truth about Eleanor's identity. "Lord Harwick claimed many things that were not his to take," Alexander replied, his voice hardening slightly. "King Alexander of Blackthorn sends his condolences for your loss, but also his firm assurance that any future aggression against his kingdom will be met with the full force of Blackthorn's might." "Condolences?" Bastian spat. "You bring us news of our lord's death and think condolences sufficient?" He gestured sharply, and guards stepped forward from their positions along the walls. "Seize them! They shall answer for this outrage!" The moment had come sooner than they'd planned, but Eleanor was ready. As the guards advanced, she stepped forward, removing the wooden amulet from beneath her gown. It began to glow immediately, pulsing with silver light in the darkened hall. "I would reconsider that order, Lord Bastian," she said, her voice carrying strange harmonics that echoed through the vast chamber. "Unless you wish to be remembered as the regent who arrested the rightful queen of the Eastern Kingdom upon her return." Bastian froze, his face draining of color as he stared at the glowing amulet. "Impossible," he whispered. "The royal line was extinguished. The child died with her parents." "The child survived," Eleanor countered, removing the silver locket to join the amulet in her palm. Both gleamed with internal light now, responding to the power flowing through her blood. Protected and hidden until she could reclaim her birthright. "Prove it," Bastian challenged, though his voice lacked conviction. "Any thief could carry trinkets." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Indeed." She turned to face the confused guards, who had halted their advance at this unexpected development. "Men of Silver Meadow, you were sworn to protect this kingdom and its rightful ruler. Look upon the amulet of King James and the locket of Queen Aurora. But more importantly, look upon their daughter, returned to claim her throne." With those words, she reached out with her awakened power, connecting not just with the small creatures hiding throughout the palace, but with the land itself. The ancient power that flowed through the silver falls, the deep roots of the birch trees in the palace garden, the very stones of the royal residence that had been quarried from sacred grounds centuries ago. The response was immediate and dramatic. The great hall filled with a soft silver glow emanating from the floor, the columns, the very air itself. The carved birch columns seemed to rustle though no wind blew, and from outside came the unmistakable chorus of wolves howling in perfect unison. "The forest speaker returns," William announced, his ranger's voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Eleanor Silvermoon, rightful queen of the Eastern Kingdom, heir to the silver throne, guardian of the old ways." Throughout the hall, guards and courtiers alike sank to their knees, some in awe, others in instinctive recognition of power greater than mortal authority. Only Bastian remained standing, his face contorted with rage and fear. "Trickery and witchcraft!" he shouted. "Guards, obey your regent!" But the guards stayed kneeling, their eyes fixed on Eleanor as she stood bathed in silver light, the amulet and locket floating inches above her outstretched palm. Alexander stepped forward then, removing the simple pin that had held his cloak closed to reveal the royal insignia of Blackthorn emblazoned on his formal attire. "Not envoy, but king," he declared. "Alexander Blackthorn, ruler of the Northern Kingdom, come to stand with Queen Eleanor as our ancestors intended. The sundering ends today." Bastian's eyes darted desperately around the hall, seeking any ally, any escape. Finding none, he made a break for a side door, his bulk moving with surprising speed. But as he reached the threshold, the door swung shut of its own accord, the ancient wood responding to Eleanor's silent command. "Lord Bastian," she said, her voice gentle yet implacable. "You have ruled in my absence, maintaining Lord Harwick's authority rather than protecting my people as a true regent should. Now you must answer for that stewardship." "You can't prove anything," he blustered, though his bravado was crumbling visibly. "I've done nothing wrong. I merely served where I was placed." "The stones of this palace remember differently," Eleanor replied. "The trees in the royal garden have witnessed your cruelty, and those you oppressed will speak if given the chance." She turned to address the hall at large. "I do not return seeking vengeance, but justice. Those who served the usurper out of fear rather than loyalty have nothing to fear from me. But those who embraced his cruelty, who profited from the suffering of my people—" She let the implication hang in the air. Throughout the hall, courtiers exchanged glances, calculations visibly running behind their eyes. Some looked relieved, others terrified. The balance of power was shifting before their eyes. "Take the former regent to the East Tower," Alexander commanded the guards, who had risen and now looked to the royal couple for direction. "He will await Queen Eleanor's judgment there." 2 guards moved to obey, escorting the suddenly deflated Bastian from the hall. Eleanor watched him go, feeling not triumph, but the heavy weight of responsibility settling more firmly on her shoulders. Judgment and mercy both would be required in the days ahead. William stepped forward, addressing the assembled court with the authority of one who had once moved freely in these circles. "The Queen has returned to her rightful place. Those loyal to the true crown of the Eastern Kingdom, come forward now to pledge your fealty." There was a moment of hesitation, and then an elderly woman in the faded finery of a noble house approached the dais. She walked with the aid of a cane, but held herself proudly as she knelt before Eleanor. "Lady Genevieve of House Silverbrook," William whispered to Eleanor, "your mother's closest friend and advisor. I wondered if she had survived the purge." "My queen," the elderly woman said, her voice quavering but determined, "I have waited 20 years for this day. My house and I pledge our unwavering loyalty to the true heir of Silvermoon." Eleanor stepped forward, helping Lady Genevieve to her feet. "Your loyalty honors me," she said warmly, "and your friendship to my mother will not be forgotten." One by one, others came forward, nobles who had hidden their true allegiance during Harwick's reign, military officers who had maintained their oaths to the crown in secret, servants who had preserved royal traditions despite the usurper's efforts to erase them. With each pledge, Eleanor felt her connection to this kingdom, her kingdom, deepening. Alexander stood beside her throughout, a steadfast presence radiating strength and support. Through their bond, she felt his pride in her, his commitment to the path they had chosen together. As the formal pledges concluded, Eleanor addressed the assembled court. "Tonight marks the beginning of restoration, not just of the rightful rule, but of the ancient balance that once blessed these lands. The Eastern and Northern Kingdoms stand united once more, as our ancestors intended before the sundering." "The Silver Wolf returns to Silver Meadow," Alexander added, gesturing to the empty space above the dais where Harwick's falcon banner had replaced the traditional royal crest. At his words, servants hurried forward, removing the green standard and unfurling a banner that William had carried concealed throughout their journey. The Silver Wolf of the Eastern Royal House on a field of midnight blue. A cheer rose from those assembled, hesitant at first, but swelling as more voices joined in. "The Silver Wolf returns! Long live Queen Eleanor! Long live the United Kingdoms!" Through her forest connection, Eleanor sensed the news spreading beyond the palace walls. Animals carrying the message in their own way, loyal servants slipping into the city to spread word of the rightful queen's return. By morning, all of Silver Meadow would know, and from there, the tidings would race outward to the furthest reaches of the Eastern Kingdom. As the formal audience concluded, Eleanor found herself surrounded by those eager to welcome her properly to her ancestral home. Lady Genevieve took it upon herself to begin making introductions, explaining connections and histories that Eleanor had never known but somehow felt familiar. "Your Majesty," the elderly noblewoman said when they had a moment of relative privacy, "there is something you should see, something preserved against this very day." Intrigued, Eleanor nodded, following as Lady Genevieve led her, Alexander, and William from the great hall through corridors that grew less traveled and more ancient as they proceeded. They ascended a spiral staircase in the oldest part of the palace, emerging finally in a tower room that overlooked the spectacular Silver Falls. "The Queen's Sanctuary," William explained softly. "Aurora spent many hours here, especially after you were born." The circular chamber was dusty from long disuse but otherwise untouched, as though its existence had been forgotten or deliberately overlooked during Harwick's reign. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes. A desk stood before the window, still holding parchment and quills, as though the Queen might return at any moment to continue her studies. And in the center of the room, upon a pedestal of pale stone, rested a crystal sphere approximately the size of a human head. "The Heartstone," Lady Genevieve said with reverence, "the greatest treasure of the Eastern royal line and the focus of the Forest Speaker's power. Harwick searched for it after the coup, but it was already hidden here, protected by enchantments he could neither break nor detect." Eleanor approached the crystal slowly, drawn by something that resonated with her awakened blood. The moonstone ring on her finger pulsed in time with a soft light that had begun to glow at the center of the sphere. "What is it exactly?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Many things," Lady Genevieve replied. "A repository of ancient knowledge, a focus for the forest magic that flows through your bloodline, a window through which the Forest Speaker may view distant lands. But most importantly, it is the heart of the covenant between your ancestors and the primal spirits of this land, the sacred pact that established the Eastern Kingdom." Eleanor reached out hesitantly, her fingertips hovering just above the crystal's smooth surface. "May I?" "It is yours by right of blood," Lady Genevieve confirmed. "It has awaited your touch these 20 years." Taking a deep breath, Eleanor placed her palm flat against the crystal. Instantly, warmth surged up her arm, and the sphere blazed with brilliant silver light. Images flooded her mind, generations of her ancestors communing with the forest, maintaining the balance between human and primal worlds, the great sundering that had divided the original kingdom, her parents working to re-establish connections with the Northern Kingdom through her eventual marriage to a Blackthorn prince, and finally, tragically, Harwick's betrayal and the desperate plan to save her, the last silver moon. But the visions did not end there. They pushed forward into possibility, the reunification of North and East, the awakening of old magics long dormant, the restoration of balance to lands out of harmony for centuries, and something more, a warning of darkness gathering beyond their borders, the same corruption that had infected Harwick seeking new vessels for its destructive power. When the visions faded, Eleanor found herself supported by Alexander's strong arm, her legs unsteady from the intensity of the experience. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. "Everything," she whispered. "Past and possible future both." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with the lingering glow of the Heartstone's magic. "We've won a battle, but the war against whatever darkness empowered Harwick is just beginning." "We face it together," Alexander reminded her, his voice firm with conviction. "As was always meant to be." Eleanor nodded, drawing strength from his certainty and the unwavering support she felt through their bond. She turned to Lady Genevieve and William, who waited respectfully nearby. "The Eastern Kingdom awakens to its rightful rule once more," she declared. "But we have much to do. Harwick's corruption runs deep, and threats gather beyond our borders." "The people will rally to their true queen," Lady Genevieve assured her, "especially one who returns with the Forest Speaker's gifts manifesting so powerfully." "And Blackthorn stands with you," Alexander added, "our kingdoms united as one force." Eleanor's gaze returned to the Heartstone, now glowing with a steady, gentle light. "Then let us begin. The Silver Wolf has returned to Silver Meadow, and the ancient balance must be restored before the darkness can spread further." As if in response to her words, a chorus of howls rose from the forest beyond the palace, her wolf allies announcing to all creatures that the forest speaker had reclaimed her ancestral seat. The Silver Falls seemed to roar more loudly, the ancient power of the land itself awakening to its queen's presence. Standing in her mother's sanctuary, surrounded by those who had risked everything to see this day arrive, Eleanor Silvermoon Blackthorn embraced her destiny fully at last. Not just a forester's daughter, not just a king's bride, but a queen in her own right, with the blood of ancient magic flowing through her veins and the wisdom of 2 kingdoms to guide her path forward. The wooden amulet and silver locket rested against her heart, symbols of the dual heritage that had shaped her, one crafted with a father's love, one bearing a mother's hope. Together, they represented everything she had been and everything she would become. The Wolf Queen, the Forest Speaker, the bridge between worlds long sundered. And as darkness gathered in distant lands, as ancient enemies prepared their next moves, Eleanor stood ready to face whatever came. Not alone, but with Alexander at her side, their souls bound by magic older than the kingdoms they now ruled together. The Silver Wolf had returned home at last.